Hey guys, welcome to Green Bean Fiction. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku and Class 1A got trapped on Prehistoric Island? Part 2, Final. This story is Clase 1A en la Prehistoria by Izumi_Miyamura 544. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button, as your one like motivates me to bring more stories, and subscribe the channel if you are new so you won't miss our latest videos. Our heroes had already arrived at the island. Izuku, who had memorized the coordinates he had previously seen on a floating obelisk, decided to go and see what was there. So, with the help of the map, he started walking. Everyone followed him, including the dinosaurs. Knowing this, Izuku continued walking. No one said anything because after what happened yesterday, Izuku adopted a more upright and strict posture. Now he was a true leader. "Stop it up or you'll be raptor food," Izuku scolded in an authoritative voice, and everyone nodded and walked faster. Minutes passed. They had been walking for a total of 30 minutes without resting, all while maintaining their speed to avoid a gift from Izuku, but even so, fatigue took its toll on most of them. "Izuku, we've been walking for 30 minutes without a break, when can we rest?" Jiro asked, looking at the green-haired boy who continued on his way, still maintaining his speed. "Jiro, would you say the same thing if a freaking Rex was following us?" Izuku asked while glancing at the purple-haired girl out of the corner of his eye. "And no, it's not the same," the rocker exclaimed, looking at her friend. "Okay, rest," Izuku said as everyone sighed wearily and sat down, except for the dinosaurs. They all sat down to rest, but then they saw Izuku continue on his way. "Izuku, where are you going?" Momo asked, watching him walk even further away. "I told you to rest, not that I would wait for you. I will continue on my way. Follow me if you wish, stay if that's what you want." Izuku spoke without looking back, causing everyone to sigh again and begin to follow him. They had been there for an hour now, though exhaustion was setting in. They didn't want to be abandoned by Izuku. Many were angered by Izuku's new attitude, but there was nothing they could do, only he could keep them alive. Others understood, as everything that had happened had caused him several traumas, and this attitude wasn't just a way of hiding it, but also of protecting them from those same traumas. This made them feel bad, because Izuku helped them so much, and they didn't help him in any way. And then the inevitable happened. A huge dinosaur emerged from the bushes. The first thing it did was take a direct bite at Sato, who was closest to the forest. Everyone watched in fear, as they were about to witness the death of a comrade firsthand. But Izuku pushed it aside and placed his spear between the jaws of the enormous carnivore. Allosaurus. They usually travel in packs, but I couldn't see the others. Could it be? Izuku thought quickly, then instantly opened his eyes and yelled, "Get away from here now." Everyone did as asked, and as if by magic, a pair of more Allosaurus emerged from the forest, swiftly biting the spot where they had all been standing. Everyone's eyes widened in surprise. They would have died if it weren't for Izuku. Seconds later, they wondered how Izuku would deal with this small but not weak pack. "Dofty, I need you." The little dinosaur understood, quickly spitting twice, once at Izuku's spear and once at the face of the Allosaurus that attacked Sato. "Thank you." Izuku quickly began attacking the dinosaur with the help of his quirk. Izuku was attentive to his body, since he didn't know how to control OFA, and was surprised to see that his bones weren't breaking. Then he had an idea: to spread OFA throughout his body and thus properly control his power. So he did, and the moment he realized it, he felt stronger and more agile. Now his attacks were faster, leaving the dinosaur no chance to attack, until at one point he felt something slowly breaking. Crack! Izuku heard. Looking around he saw it. His spear was shattered. He didn't realize when it happened, but because of that he lowered his guard and received a bite from the dinosaur that managed to remove the acid from his face, which he dodged a little but did not prevent a fang from piercing his bicep, to then receive a blow from the dinosaur's tail that spun on its own axis, sending Izuku flying towards his companions. He began to get up, his arm covered in blood, but even in pain he forcefully ripped out the fang. Izuku looked at his friends who were crying and terrified. He simply huffed angrily before turning to look at the small pack. "Okay, Dofty, you know what to do." Izuku extended the tooth he had been holding in his arm. The little one spat on it, so Izuku now began to stretch his arms out to the sides while doing warm-up poses, then did small jumps. Okay, let's start again. Izuku tensed his arm, causing it to bleed even more, frightening his friends. He then launched himself at the three dinosaurs. With the help of his speed, Izuku attacked the one on the right, then the one on the left, and finally the one in the center, all in just seconds, leaving a green zigzag trail that caused the dinosaurs to fall to the ground with their legs severely injured. Izuku walked towards his classmates with a serious face. They all looked at his injuries with concern, but he ignored them and spoke to them with complete calmness. "Are you all right?" he asked, looking at everyone. The women's eyes welled up with tears at the original and they all crowded around Izuku. "How can you say that in your status? Don't you know we care about you? Idiot, you worried me so much. At least ask us to treat your wounds." That and more was what the girls who threw themselves on top of the protagonist said, some just tearing up and others directly crying. Well, one had her usual typical face, Yui. "Don't worry, you matter much more to me than my body," Izuku said, gently stroking each of their heads, though he was breathing with some difficulty. "Idiot," they all whispered under Izuku's confused gaze. So thereby, he couldn't finish as he fell unconscious from blood loss and exhaustion. "Izuku, Midoriya!" A cry of concern was heard from everyone present. "Mente de Izuku, 9th, welcome." Everything was in commotion. Their leader had just fainted. They didn't know what to do. They felt they could be attacked at any moment because they were in a very dangerous area. "Quick, attend to Midoriya. Sato, choose a group and gather sticks for a campfire. Jiro, you make a group and collect berries, and finally, Todoroki and I will be on guard," exclaimed Iida, who quickly took on the role of substitute leader. Everyone attended without complaint because they were in a difficult situation and did what was asked. Iida, somewhat nervously, grabbed the tooth Izuku had used as a dagger and embedded it in a stick, making a spear. He also took Izuku's bow. He didn't know how to use it properly, but the training Izuku had given them taught him a little. He then gave the bow to Todoroki, who had practiced with it previously. And so they all made a small camp to wait for Izuku to wake up. "Mente de Izuku, 9th, welcome." "Hey boy, welcome." 9th is a pleasure. Seriously, the 8th one chose a simple child. That and more is what Izuku heard. He quickly opened his eyes to find himself covered by a dark mass up to his nose, only allowing him to see. There he saw 7 figures sitting, while only 3 were visible and the rest were completely covered by the same dark mass. "Huh, where am I? The guys, I have to go back, they'll be attacked," Izuku exclaimed worriedly as he looked around. "Calm down, 9th, they're fine. I know you're worried, but calm down," exclaimed one of the invisible shadows. "Okay, where am I?" Izuku asked, and his question was answered by the visible silhouette that appeared to be that of a woman. "Oh, we are at the heart of One for All, and we are your predecessors," said the woman, who was older, had black hair, and was quite muscular. "So you're the heroine Nana?" Izuku asked, somewhat surprised, and the woman nodded. "Okay, and you, show some respect, kid. I'm Daigoro, the 4th holder. He's Hikage. Kid, let's get to the point, we don't have much time." Izuku nodded, as Daigoro gave off an imposing aura. 9th, One for All isn't just a quirk that can be passed on to the next generation. It stores everything about its previous wielders, and it's all here, in its core. One for All was created by All for One when he gave his brother, the first, the strength-enhancing quirk. But the first already had a quirk that allowed him to pass his quirk on to someone else. "I suppose you know where we're going with this," Hikage spoke, and Izuku listened attentively. "Well, the first's quirk fused with the strength-enhancing one, and that's how One for All was created. The first passed it on to the second, and his quirk and genetic information remained within him. This happened with all of us, but One for All was always imperfect and unable to compete with its brother, All for One, until this moment. You, 9th, Izuku Midoriya, One for All has reacted to you and allowed you to do something no one else could. Access the core. This gives you the possibility of awakening the true power of One for All. The power that only one person can be capable of saving them all. That power, now it's yours, Izuku Midoriya. As the 3rd Hokage, I ask this of you. Complete and perfect one for all and eliminate the problem that has lasted so long. Izuku Midoriya, you can be a hero. Even though it wasn't the first time Izuku had heard those words, it still awakened Izuku's infinite determination, and he nodded seriously. Ninth, from this moment on you will have 3 more quirks besides one for all. It's up to you whether they awaken or not. But as we've realized, you have one for all very limited, so the quirks won't have their true potential, but hopefully they'll help you in some way on this island, Daigoro said, still maintaining his serious demeanor. Nana, Daigoro, Hikage. Thank you. Now, a question. How do I get out of here? Izuku asked, his face expressionless, looking at the previous holders. Oh yeah, about that. Sweet dreams. Ninth, Nana said nervously as Izuku received a strong blow from Daigoro that ended up knocking him unconscious. Hey, you didn't need to use so much force, Hikage complained. This gives you a small taste of what's to come, Daigoro said as he watched Izuku's body disappear. Outside of Izuku's mind, everything was out of control. Several herds of dinosaurs smelled the Allosaurus carcasses and went and ran into our group, which was in trouble. Iida and Todoroki were injured, Iida with a broken right leg and Todoroki with a dislocated shoulder. And the others didn't know how to fight against beings of such caliber alone, but Izuku's unconscious body was intact. They were all protecting him, waiting for him to wake up and help them. And it didn't take long, because Izuku began to get up while feeling something strange in his back and his feet felt very light. He looked behind him and saw several dark, sharp whips with green edges extending from it. He looked ahead and saw many dinosaurs and launched himself at them with greater speed than usual. Apparently, entering the core had weakened the barrier that held back his power, and now he could use 10%. Iida flew past like a green blur and grabbed the new spear, and seconds later 2 dinosaurs fell to the ground with their hind legs mutilated. Then Izuku appeared behind them, his whips cracking furiously, protecting Izuku from the next dinosaurs that attacked him, knocking them down without front legs and some headless. Izuku moved nimbly against the dinosaurs while the whips protected him. The battle continued for a few more minutes until the ground was stained with pools of blood and littered with viscera and pieces of dinosaur brain, making the spectators vomit. Izuku ended up covered in blood, and when he looked at the sky, it was dark and dotted with small white lights. Seeing this, Izuku simply collapsed to the ground and fell asleep. His friends carried him and placed him in a clean spot, taking turns on guard duty and sleeping peacefully. The sleepy Class 1A was waking up as small rays of light hit their faces. Upon waking, they saw several things. One, they were soaked in blood, which brought back memories of the previous night, causing some to vomit as they looked up and saw so many entrails scattered across the red-stained floor. 2. Izuku was missing. This was already common. After all, he was always the first to get up and do something to save them from exerting themselves. They simply gathered sticks for a campfire and packed up their camp to wait for Izuku. Their concern grew shortly after he didn't return, as without him they didn't have much food. But what was Izuku doing? Well, the young man had been kidnapped by a certain invisible girl. When Izuku woke up and saw a couple of torn garments floating, he knew immediately that it was her. "Oh, you're still alive," the young man said listlessly. "I thought you'd be more excited to see me," the invisible girl said as she dragged the boy along. "Yes, but you remind me of a bad time on this island," Izuku said, remembering his pink-skinned friend, and then recalling the moment she was crushed. "So, tell me," the invisible one said as she walked in a direction unknown to Izuku. "I don't want to, you'll feel bad, just tell me where you're taking me," the green-haired boy asked, making the girl stop and let him stand up. "I need your help. As you know, I'm invisible, which prevents the dinosaurs from seeing me. So I explored and survived on this island without much trouble, until today. Last night, I found a cave. I went in thinking the animals wouldn't see me. They don't see me, but they do hear me, and that's how my clothes ended up damaged. So I need your help to get to the end of the cave." I spoke, looking the boy in the eyes, but he didn't notice. "Okay," I said as I continued walking in the direction Toru was walking. "Oh, that was fast," Toru said, sounding confused, before running after Izuku. They walked for several minutes, talking about various things. Well, Toru did most of the talking, Izuku just made noises of nodding or shaking his head. Then they reached the cave, a simple cave at first glance. There wasn't much more than some mushrooms on the walls and many minerals embedded in the floors and walls. What a cave you came to find, Izuku said, activating his quirk while trying to activate the whips from before. Ah, as I suspected. I need more practice. Let's go in. Izuku entered, followed by Toru. They thought it would be full of aggressive animals, but no, although there were quite a few, they were few compared to those Izuku had faced previously, so he finished them off without much trouble. And they continued their journey. Once they reached a depth where air was scarce, Izuku began to hold his breath, allowing Toru to breathe. They continued descending until oxygen was severely lacking. With great effort, Izuku grabbed Toru's head and kissed her, much to her surprise. They shared the air between them until they finally reached an area with oxygen. To their astonishment, it was an area that shone intensely. They separated and followed a loud sound that could be heard nearby. Wow, I didn't think you were so daring, Izuku-kun, she said the last part mischievously while laughing. It was that or die of asphyxiation, Izuku said as he followed the sound. But you should have warned me, so I could have prepared, she said, laughing, hoping to make the boy nervous. If I warned you, I wouldn't have had enough oxygen to get here. The boy kept searching until he saw an opening in the wall. This way. Izuku entered, followed by the girl, and they both saw a strange artifact. It was suspended in the air, above what appeared to be a dark base. Wow, who would have thought something so strange would be here? Toru said, approaching the object. Don't get so close, you don't know what it does, Izuku said, analyzing the object from a distance. Come on, I don't think anything bad is going to happen. The girl was interrupted by a shock that coursed through her body, followed by a small explosion that threw her against a wall. I told you so, I said, looking at the device that had begun to rotate slowly. Can you help me up? The girl asked, making Izuku turn to look at her and extend his hand. I didn't know you could deactivate your quirk, Izuku said, admiring the girl. And no, I can't, the girl said, looking at the strange young man. Look at your hands, the girl did as asked. When the girl saw her hands, she saw something that surprised her. A pair of hands with fair skin and a fine, smooth complexion that was, at first glance, quite noticeable. Huh, both young men can still be seen surprised by Toru's appearance. Wow, who would have thought you were so beautiful? Izuku said, looking into Toru's eyes, which made her blush slightly, but, I'm surprised that the artifact had that reaction with you. I wonder, what would happen if I touched that thing? Don't even think about it, that thing gave me a huge electric shock, I don't want the same thing to happen to you, she said, sounding a little pained. You didn't survive because you're weak, you never trained at the academy, so it was to be expected. Toru felt his pride being attacked and it hurt, because the boy was right, he only survived thanks to his quirk. Izuku approached without any concern. As he got closer, the device began to spin very rapidly and suddenly, it disappeared. Wow, well, get out. He didn't finish speaking as he fell to the ground with a great pain invading his chest. Shit. Izuku, what's wrong? Toru asked worriedly. AHG. Izuku screamed in pain as he clutched his chest, trying to ease the pain. I can't breathe. He gasped. My lungs are going to explode. Wait, I'll help you. Toru tried to grab Izuku, but when she touched him, she felt a strong shock in her hand that made her pull away instantly. Ouch. AHG. Izuku's scream was very loud. All his pain could be felt embodied in a few but resonant sounds. Izuku, please, don't die. Toru said, tears welling in her eyes as she witnessed the suffering of her former partner. Izuku saw his classmate crying and despite all the pain he was in, and against all odds, he got up to sit in front of Toru. Stop. I'm *AHG. Fine. Izuku gasped as the pain intensified, but he tried to keep Toru from getting scared. It's okay, Izuku said, hugging Toru and gently stroking her head. He felt the shocks, but he didn't care, it was more important that she was calm. See, I'm okay. Words appearing between represent muffled words or shouts during dialogue, so that the dialogue is not interrupted. Unfortunately for both of them, A small group of giant scorpions heard Izuku scream and headed towards him in search of food. What the hell is going on in this cave? Izuku thought as he struggled to his feet. Toru, he shouted, catching the girl's attention. It's highly unlikely we'll both escape. In the worst case scenario, tell the boys to dream, cry, laugh, play, love, but above all, to live with such intensity that even the goddess of life will envy them. And that the goddess of death will dream of killing them. And you, have no regrets, this is my will. Live for me. Live for Mina. Live for them who are waiting for you in Japan. For your mother, your father, your family, they're all waiting for you at home. Live for them. Now I order you, run away right now. Izuku yelled, swallowing all his pain and pushing his body to an inhuman level as Toru fled the scene. Mother, All Might, Aizawa. Guys, this will probably be my last dance. And in the great style of a hero. A dance with death. Izuku shouted, seeing how many beings were attracted by his screams. Ah! Izuku let out a Spartan-style scream before launching himself into a bare-knuckle fight, enduring all his pain. Toru, she was devastated, tears welling in her eyes. Her friend had likely died. With his last will, he had commanded her to live, and this broke her heart. He had sacrificed his life for hers, no one had ever done that for her. She had also heard what Izuku had said before he went into battle. The fact that he had mentioned his family before fighting made her feel even sadder. After all, he had a family too. She simply stayed in a part of the cave where there was oxygen and there she rested, hugging her legs with her arms and curling up into a ball to start crying as she remembered Izuku. Sniff why? Sniff why the hell does this have to happen? He screamed in tears, helpless, and in his fit of rage he punched the wall, damaging his fist. Shit. The girl collapsed in sadness and began to cry even harder, but this time, without that green-haired boy to comfort her. Several hours passed, the girl continued crying non-stop. During those hours she didn't stop crying, her eyes were red and swollen from crying so much. But to her surprise, she felt something on her head. She looked up to see it. A boy with green hair and a big smile. What a man I am, making a lovely young lady cry. My mother would give me a gift for that. Izuku chuckled slightly, making Toru's tears even more prominent than before, only now they were tears of radiant happiness. Izuku. Toru threw herself at Izuku, tears streaming down her face. Her instincts and overwhelming happiness took over, causing her to unconsciously kiss the protagonist. It only took a few seconds for her to come to her senses and pull away. I'm sorry, she apologized repeatedly, while Izuku just laughed. Relax, it's not the first time this has happened, Izuku said, making the girl blush even more by reminding her of the kiss in the cave. Well, he didn't finish because the pain he had previously ignored returned, but now with much more force, amplified by the numerous wounds he had from his previous fight. Pua. Ah! Izuku screamed in pain as he vomited blood and his chest compressed to the point where he felt his heart would be crushed. Izuku, not again. Please hold on. The girl's desperate cries only made Izuku want to hold on even more. With all his strength, determination, and pride, he stood up to hug her and wait for the pain to subside. Several more hours passed. Night had fallen, Izuku's pain had disappeared, but the young men still remained embraced. The warmth of the embrace was addictive, neither wanted to separate. Toru, I'm sorry to ask this. But can we sleep like this? He said somewhat embarrassed, although the violence of the island calmed his nervousness, but the fact that it was the first time he would sleep with one made him feel ashamed. Okay, but what about the boys? Toru asked, somewhat confused. The human body can survive 3 days without food. Besides, I think they were berries and they're in a safe area. The blood and organs keep the dinosaurs away because they know something similar awaits them, so there won't be a problem, the boy said, settling into a spot in the cave and hugging Toru to sleep. Good night, Toru said, also a little embarrassed for sleeping cuddled up to the boy. Both young men were asleep and peacefully embraced, but Izuku's expression kept changing. Mente de Izuku. The young man stood before his predecessors, but there was a small problem. They were all bound by strange nets. What the hell is going on here? Izuku asked, somewhat irritated, since just a few minutes ago he had been completely happy and calm, hugging his partner. Well, while you were out flirting, we were suffering because of that damn contraption, Deku said as he struggled to get the nets off him. So, the pain I felt was the artifact entering my body and merging with the core of One for All, the boy asked, quickly analyzing the situation. That's right, but it seems it not only trapped us but is also causing your body to mutate rapidly. The pain was initially due to that, but when it returned, it was the first mutation of your body. The artifact completely destroyed your body and rebuilt it thousands of times in just minutes. That's why the pain was unbearable. All of this was so that your cells would enlarge and become more resistant. At that moment, your body is as resistant as someone with a weak resistance quirk, Nana said, looking at the boy and violently moving his body to free himself. AHG! Izuku screamed, falling to his knees in pain. Nana, seeing this, stopped to watch as the boy calmed down and began breathing heavily. Damn, if we try to free ourselves it causes you pain, Deku said, sounding somewhat angry. Okay kid, that's all for today, your little friend is calling you, Nana said, emphasizing little friend, making the young man blush. Outside of Izuku's mind, Toru had woken up and, without breaking the embrace, stared at Izuku's face with a smile. You look so cute when you sleep, and you remind me of Izuku from UA, Toru smiled nostalgically, looking at the boy. You know, you look like a stalker, Izuku smiled as he looked at Toru, who blushed. The two young men had a lively chat and got up to leave the cave. Toru, here, take my shirt, Izuku said, taking off his shirt, revealing his body which wasn't so defined before, but due to certain events, became even more defined, and turning to the side. But why are you giving it to me? The girl asked, blushing at the sight of the boy's body. Your clothes are badly damaged and your skin is showing a lot, I said, turning away so as not to see the girl's body. Hey, where did you get the leather and the shirt? The girl asked as she put on the shirt and saw that it was a little too big on her. I won a sewing contest when I was little, so it wasn't too difficult, the young man said, puffing out his chest with pride. Well, let's go to my camp. I'll give you food and water there, and you can decide what to do after that. Okay, the lively girl said as she talked to Izuku along the way. Attacks were inevitable along the way, but nothing Izuku couldn't handle. The journey was long and the young men were having a lively conversation, but there was one thing that bothered Izuku, his pain had returned. This time he could bear it, but it was still very uncomfortable and painful. During the journey, both young men's stomachs rumbled, signaling that lunchtime had arrived. And that's how I ended up having to run 100 meters without stopping, Toru said, gesturing with his hands and arms. Oh, he didn't finish because his stomach growled, followed by the girls. Wow. Okay, let's go pick berries, the girl said cheerfully. Izuku stared at the girl for a moment. She seemed to know what he was doing because she avoided bushes with different leaves. How long have you been eating berries? Izuku asked, to which the girl looked at him strangely. Since we separated, why are you asking? Don't you eat berries? The girl asked, confused. Yes, but we eat meat, I thought you did too, she said while looking around for something. But how will you do it? You don't have any weapons, she said, sounding worried. Hey Toru, you still have so much to learn, Izuku said, grabbing a stick, a stone, and a leaf. This will do, after all, it's only for one use. And that's how Izuku, in a few minutes, brought both objects together and created a swift spear. Okay, now to find a dinosaur, but we have to do it big. Izuku quickly made a racket. Banging, roaring, shouting, and lots of noise were enough to attract a small pack of raptors. Izuku, are you crazy? That's too much for you, she said, worried about the young man. Don't worry, it's not the first time this has happened to me, Izuku reassured the girl and launched his attack. It started with the one that seemed to be the leader. The leader of the pack also lunged at him. The raptor gave a small jump, which took Izuku by surprise, but he dodged it. Seeing the dinosaur fall, he attacked its right thigh. The dinosaur roared in pain and, in a swift turn, tried to bite Izuku, who blocked it with his spear. The other two dinosaurs, seeing Izuku's action, surrounded him. He released one of his hands and punched the dinosaur in the head with his fist and his quirk, making it stumble back. Izuku, now with his spear in hand, saw the 3 raptors surrounding him, circling him and attacking in unison. Izuku moved, dodging the dinosaurs. Toru stood a little ways away, scared, because she didn't know how this was going to end. It was the first time she'd seen someone fight dinosaurs. The pack leader heard the girl's small, anxious gasp and turned to look at her. There she lay on a rock, her hand covering her mouth, her legs closed and pressed against her body, terrified as she watched the dinosaur approaching her. With her hand she tried to push the dinosaur away. Izuku, worried about his friend, ran towards the dinosaur to attack it from behind, managing to make a large cut in its back. The dinosaur fell to the ground with a dry, hard sound. The 2 remaining raptors fled upon seeing their leader defeated, as he was the strongest of the pack. Izuku approached Toru to reassure her. "Are you okay?" the green-haired man asked, worried. "Why yes, just a little scared," the girl said shyly. "Okay, we'll eat some meat today, but I suppose you don't know how to skin an animal, so I'll do it. Just find some wood and dry leaves to cook the meat." The girl nodded and turned away so she wouldn't see him skinning the dinosaur. Minutes passed and Izuku finished skinning the animal. He kept the skin and organs for later use, grabbed a piece of the tail and pierced it with the spear, then grabbed the chest piece and pierced it with another stick, now exposing it to the flame of the hot fire. They waited for the meat to cook, while they talked about anything and everything, although it was somewhat awkward for the girl since she had just witnessed the murder of a dinosaur. Knowing this, Izuku tried many ways to get that thought out of her mind, and the one that really worked was a hug, which the girl returned with a smile. "I know it scares you to know that on this island you can die and see many other people die," Izuku said, hugging the girl with mixed hair. "Yes, now without my quirk I can't survive easily, now they see me, they attack me, I could die at any moment," the girl said through small tears. "That's why I want you to be with me, so I can protect you. I can't guarantee you'll come out unharmed, but if you're alive, I'll protect you with my life, just like I'll protect everyone else. There you can talk to the others and maybe even make a new best friend." "Because Mina died," Izuku said, remembering Mina's last moment with a touch of sadness. What? The young woman was in shock. Her best friend had died, and she hadn't been able to spend her last moment with her. Yes, it was very sad for everyone. Because she was the one who brought us fun, she was our friend, but unfortunately a dinosaur crushed her, Izuku said, hugging the girl because he already knew what was coming. Without delay, the girl's tears began to flow, wetting Izuku's shoulder. He felt terrible, because she was his best friend and the news had come so suddenly. A few minutes passed and the girl calmed down, so Izuku separated from her, seeing her eyes red from tears. "I accept," the girl said, making Izuku smile. "Okay, now eat and we'll go with the others to continue our journey," Izuku said and the girl nodded. They ate and rested for a while, talking and taking a short nap in each other's arms, as it was comfortable for both of them. They woke up and continued on their way, both feeling the sea breeze so they assumed they were close to the coast. They both ran and thus reached the coast with the sand painted red and only rotten remains with a bad smell scattered on the ground. And in the distance, he saw a small group of people. Izuku shouted and waved. It wasn't long before he saw 3 dinosaurs running towards him. A small quadruped, a fairly large biped with horns, and a raptor. Toru, seeing them, got scared and hid behind Izuku. But when he saw them surround Izuku and start licking him, and Izuku petting them, he calmed down. The group approached him, somewhat annoyed at being left alone for 2 days. "Izuku, where did you go?" Lita asked, sounding angry and hungry. "Well, she kidnapped me and took me to a cave," Izuku said, stepping aside. Toru stood there, looking somewhat embarrassed. "If you put it like that, it sounds bad," she said, sounding somewhat embarrassed. "But that's what happened." She laughed to embarrass the girl even more. "Since I know you don't recognize her, it's Toru." Everyone in 1A was surprised and started asking the girl questions, which she answered somewhat nervously. Izuku walked away accompanied by the dinosaurs and went hunting with them so his friends could eat. The Carnotaurus, Raptor, and Triceratops team hunted a small herd of Stegosaurus without much difficulty. With the help of the Triceratops, they managed to move the carcasses to their camp to skin and eat them. Night fell. Izuku finished skinning the dinosaurs and making the campfire. Toru had integrated well into the group, They were about to have dinner. Everyone was somewhat happy because they were eating meat after 2 days without eating it. After eating, everyone went to sleep except for Izuku, who stayed on guard duty. He grabbed his spear, bow, and knife, lit a fire, and carried a log to sit on and watch the moon and the sea while he waited to avoid being attacked. Several hours passed. The moon was beautiful reflected in the water. Izuku heard footsteps behind him, but because they were slow and calm, he didn't turn around to see who was making them. "The moon is beautiful, isn't it?" A calm and sweet voice spoke from behind Izuku. "Yes," Izuku said, turning to look at the source of the voice and seeing Toru. She sat down next to him and rested her head on Izuku's shoulder. "What will we do now?" Toru asked, watching the moon reflected on the sea. "I don't know. Let's hope nothing bad happens and that they find us soon," Izuku said as he rested his head on Toru's head. "Hey, don't you want to sleep?" Toru asked, noticing that Izuku had dark circles under his eyes. "I'd like to, but I don't want to wake someone up to stand guard," Izuku continued staring at the sea. "I'll be right back," Toru said, getting up, and Izuku looked at her, puzzled. Seconds later, Toru arrived, dragging Todoroki who was dozing. "Toru, there's no need to wake him up," Izuku said, a bead of sweat forming on his temple. "You should sleep, he's already slept a lot," Toru said as he pulled Izuku towards a sleeping bag. "Okay, just because I know you haven't changed your mind." Izuku lay back and closed his eyes, but after a few seconds he felt someone next to him. He opened his eyes and saw Toru beside him. He smiled nervously and closed his eyes so he could sleep for a while. Izuku was waking up. Toru forcing him to sleep had helped him a lot, as he managed to rest quite well. He got up with a smile to see his friends already awake. The young man got up, looking for the girl who had forced him to sleep. There she was, talking with the other girls in the group, wearing a radiant smile. Without a doubt, her appearance made her stand out from the rest. He thought about talking to her but decided to let her spend time with the others while he did his stretches. Since arriving on the island, Izuku began training even harder than before, as he could no longer rely on his quirk. While it helped him in high-risk situations, he couldn't always depend on it. At first it was somewhat difficult because his training with All Might seemed like a warm-up compared to this. Throughout the training, he carried weights that doubled or in some cases tripled his own weight. This was done while performing hundreds of push-ups, followed by 10 minutes of planks. He also did some abdominal exercises, but these were situational as they didn't contribute much to his strength. He finished by running for about 2 hours, followed by a 1-hour training session focused on marksmanship, spear combat, reaction speed, and concentration. The young man always went hunting after finishing his training. Today was no exception. He went out with the help of his prehistoric friends. As usual, he headed towards the forest. His friends saw him leave but said nothing, except for the new one. "Hey, is nobody helping Izuku?" she asked, somewhat worried about his health. "No, because we don't like hunting," Iida said while doing something else. "But, he's there alone against who knows how many dinosaurs," the girl said, sounding worried. "Don't worry, he always comes back unharmed, so just tranquilizers," Momo replied nonchalantly. The girl nodded, not entirely convinced. The green-haired one was wandering through the jungle, looking in many directions, searching for something simple but enough to satisfy everyone's hunger. "My God, this island is so peaceful. I keep thinking it's better to be here than to go back to the city, but what will happen to you all if we return? What will I do with you? You can't live there. You're giants and you need meat," I said, looking at the two carnivores who tilted their heads. "And you're very big, and there's very little space in the city," now looking at the herbivore. "And the truth is, I don't want to be separated from you. Maybe being with you will mean being alone on this island." Izuku pushed those thoughts away and continued searching for something to hunt. Minutes passed, turning into an hour. Now Izuku was worried. If there was nothing to hunt, it meant that something big had hunted them. What's going on here? He fell silent as he found a footprint his size. Oh. Okay, we have nothing to do here. Izuku turned around and started walking, until he heard a great roar that shook the trees followed by hurried footsteps. Something big is coming. Izuku gripped his spear firmly, spread his legs, extended the spear point, and placed one leg in front of the other in a diagonal line, forming a fighting stance that left no superficial openings. The dinosaurs just started roaring, trying to scare away whatever was running towards them. A long, tense 10 seconds passed when the footsteps were heard getting even closer. The dinosaurs ran away from there. Herds and herds flew, ran, some simply stood still waiting for their death, and it happened. A huge snout decorated with sharp 10 centimeters teeth bathed in a crimson-red hue slammed a small Carnotaurus that was passing by hard against the ground and dragged it as it kicked to get free. Then many bones were heard breaking. The horrific scene from a few seconds ago made Izuku understand what could happen to them, so by pure instinct he took a few steps back. The green hair saw his hands. Trembling hands replaced his always firm hands. A completely trembling and sweaty body begged him to run, then his reflexes acted, dodging a huge bite that knocked down a row of trees. What the hell is this? He exclaimed, completely terrified upon seeing a T-Rex, but not a normal one. It was several times larger than a common one, and it also seemed much more aggressive. It looked like an alpha. Izuku wanted to run, but he couldn't. Now he was in a kill or be killed situation. Without much thought, he moved one leg forward, stretched his body back, extended his arm with the spear, and aimed. The result was that the spear pierced one of the Rex's eyes. Taking advantage of the Rex's stupor, both the Carnotaurus and the raptor rushed to attack. The raptor leapt and sank its claws into the muscle above the Rex's leg, gnawing and tearing away flesh without stopping, leaving a large wound on the leg. The Carnotaurus bit the Rex's tendon, causing it to fall so that the Triceratops could then charge at it and drive its horns into its chest. Izuku was surprised by his dinosaur's teamwork, but he didn't expect that in a fit of rage the Rex would shake violently, throwing the raptor against a tree. Izuku wanted to go help him but had to dodge a powerful bite. Without any melee weapon, he grabbed his bow. With the few arrows he had, he began running in circles around the Rex, firing them and trying to distract the great carnivore. And he succeeded. The Rex focused all its attention on the green-haired boy. Izuku noticed this and began to fire the arrows with greater precision to inflict more damage while his dinosaurs recovered. Once he ran out of arrows, he saw his last weapon, a small knife made from a tooth. He grabbed it, somewhat shakily, and with a swift maneuver, threw it at the Rex's torso. Once the knife pierced the great carnivore's skin, Izuku ran towards it. In an act of madness, he jumped and hung from one of the embedded arrows. Then he leapt to the dinosaur's head and grabbed the spear, pulling it down so the dinosaur roared in pain and thrashed about, hitting his green fur. He quickly recovered to look around, seeing his dinosaurs already wounded and the raptor still on the ground. At that moment, I only wanted one thing, for it all to end. In a desperate attempt, he went straight for the Rex's head. It roared and snapped at him. The boy dodged with a backflip and lunged again. He repeated this cycle multiple times, but the Rex kept him at bay with its constant snapping at the air. Worry clouded his mind. He wasn't thinking, he just wanted it all to end in an instant. And after several attempts, he managed to inflict a deep wound on the Rex's chin. Taking a moment to think, he analyzed the situation, calmed down, and attacked again, now with more coordination, circling the Rex and attacking its blind spots. The Rex tried to keep up with Izuku, but its large size prevented it, and sometimes it bumped into the trees. Izuku noticed the Rex's tendon and thigh were bleeding profusely, so in a swift movement he approached. He didn't expect the Rex to turn quickly, causing its bite to lightly graze the green-haired boy's chest, who, thanks to his reflexes, avoided being decapitated by the bite. The Rex moved away and resumed running in circles. Somewhat tired of this, he crouched down and spun around quickly, causing his tail to strike Izuku hard. Without much thought, he ordered his scaly friends to attack, which they did. Again, the carnivores went for his legs, and the herbivore charged and stabbed the Rex in the chest, finally causing him to fall defeated. Izuku, somewhat stunned by the size and strength of the Rex, thought about how to move it. He couldn't find an easy way, so in a few minutes he built a small cart that he made the Triceratops pull. Although it was difficult for the Rex, he managed to get it close to the area where they were staying, and Izuku pulled it the rest of the way. When his companions arrived, who were somewhat hungry, they complained about the delay. "Why did you take so long?" Iida asked, sounding frustrated. Yes, I was already hungry, Jiro said, sounding somewhat annoyed. And so each one showed their anger at the delay, except for a few, something that angered Izuku. What the hell do you want me to do? Do you think this is easy? I just hunted a freaking T-Rex that probably broke my back and arm bones. I dragged the damn carcass all the way up the mountain, and on top of doing nothing, you're complaining. Next time, everyone's going to get their own food. If I'd known, I wouldn't have brought anything, Izuku said angrily as he pulled out his spear and stuck it into a log. Then he sat down on the log and used his small knife to skin the dinosaur piece by piece. And don't even think about touching the carcass. You wanted speed. Go get your meat yourselves. Hey, you can't do that, it's inhumane. A boy from Class 1B expressed his anger. Inhuman. I'll ask you 3 questions. Answer all 3 correctly and I'll give everyone meat. Answer 1 wrong and no one will eat from here. Okay. The boy nodded, somewhat confident. Okay. Where are we? On an island at Point Nemo, I say, smiling slightly at the simplicity. Correct. 2 are missing. What laws apply here? None. Wrong. The law of the strongest. Do you think the dinosaurs care about your health? No. Rather, do you think I care about your health? On this island, everything is about strength. You follow me because I'm stronger than you. They follow me because I'm stronger than them. He pointed to the dinosaurs eating pieces of the T-Rex or berries, respectively. He died because I'm stronger and smarter than him. Now he pointed to the T-Rex. Every single one of you is weak. Since the discovery of a quirk, humanity hasn't improved, it's worsened, because we rely too much on this ability. But what happens if you take it away? He dies. Exactly. I've been scrambling for food to keep them alive, but thanks for taking one worry off my mind. Oh, wait, there's one more question. Izuku feigned surprise. What compels me to keep them alive? Morality. Correct. Now here's your reward. Izuku contemptuously threw a piece of Rex's body. Do whatever you want with it. The piece was big enough to feed everyone, but they were quite hungry, so they would have to endure their hunger, at least until they found something else to eat. Toru was about to gather sticks to cook the piece of meat when he heard his name. Toru, come here. He saw the green-haired man beckoning him closer. And when he was next to him he saw him extend a piece of meat almost twice the size of the previous one. What is this? Do whatever you want with it, share it if you like, or eat it yourself, it's your piece. Izuku was focused on skinning the Rex to make use of every part of it. As time passed, everyone had eaten. Toru shared his piece, while Izuku had only left a pool of dried blood on the ground and a skull he didn't know what to do with. I used the teeth as spare spears and arrows. I tie some bones together with vines to create a kind of arm and leg armor. I cut the ribs and used them for arrows. I didn't know what to do with the skull, so I left it lying there, and I used the rest of the bones and hides to make a saddle for the Triceratops. This saddle had several ways to move the hides and some chests for storing the bones. And once everything is finished, I cook a small piece for him and store the leftover meat in a chest with a little salt to make it last longer. Where do I get the salt? Well, with the help of the skin I use as a filter, I filter the sea salt and store it in a chest. Attention! I speak loudly, drawing everyone's attention. We're leaving, gather everything up. After several complaints that were ignored, seeing that Izuku wouldn't stop, they gathered the important things and left. The journey was long, approximately 2 hours of walking. The problems were few, only some small packs of raptors that were quickly dispatched by the green-haired one. From afar, it was clear that the green-haired man was angry. Some understood it was because of his hypocrisy in not appreciating their effort, others simply labeled him arrogant. They continued on their way without saying a word to Izuku, who was simply on alert, knowing he would be attacked because of the constant smell of flesh and blood that emanated from him. And sooner rather than later, a huge claw emerged from the forest. There he saw one of the few herbivorous theropods, a Therizinosaurus. He didn't know why it attacked him, until, scanning the terrain, he saw claw marks on the trees and discovered they were on his land. Get away from here now! I shouted in concern. Therizinosaurus might rival some large carnivores, but these were far more intelligent. I was in big trouble and didn't know how to get out of it. I couldn't believe what was happening. Izuku was currently gravely wounded by enormous claws. He felt like he would die from the pain. Sharp claws that mercilessly tore through every single muscle fiber in his chest, his insides visible through the wound. Izuku knew it. After this injury, his risk of dying was extremely high. So he quickly remembered a certain girl he swore to protect. He looked back, and there she was, scared, worried, overwhelmed with negative emotions. But Izuku, showing no weakness, smiled and decided to give it his all. Ahhhhhggg. In a scream of pain, his power erupted into black whips. No, they weren't black, they were yellow, a bright yellow that reminded Toru of a certain artifact that disabled his quirk. If I die, it will be fighting. A great 1v1 beast versus human, instinct versus tactics, strength versus nature, intelligence versus instinct, a very devastating fight for the combatants. The theropod was quickly overwhelmed by the whips of the green-haired one. But he refused to be overwhelmed and attacked according to his instincts. Wait, it wasn't instinct. The dinosaur, which possessed a certain intelligence, stopped, seemingly analyzing what was happening. What's going on? This thought crossed the green-haired boy's mind. The dinosaur quickly roared and attacked frantically again. Izuku didn't know what was happening, but he decided to finish it off. When he tried to control his whips, he didn't expect the dinosaur to charge, its claws piercing a large part of his arm. This didn't stop Izuku, who stabbed it in the back with his whips, finishing it off. A festival of blood, the ground within a few centimeters turned completely red. Both bodies fell to the ground, one completely inert and the other with slight spasms that kept him alive, still with long claws buried in his arm. As soon as both bodies fell, the companions of the man with green hair ran to help him. Izuku knew it, his body couldn't regenerate all those wounds in a short time. His journey would be delayed for several days, maybe months. Without much more blood to sustain his consciousness, he fainted, returning to his mental space. Wow, kid, you really outdid yourself now. Beating a Therizinosaurus is tough, Degoro said, laughing, but I'll leave you in the dust. It'll be interesting to see how you get out of this one. Yes, why did you bring me here? He asked, somewhat irritated, as his earlier fight had left him drained. I wanted to tell you to stop risking your life like that. Your friends are waiting for you, and there are some girls who are deeply in love with you, Nana said in a worried tone. The boy certainly knew how to give people a fright. But if I don't risk my life, who will? My friends don't want to fight those dinosaurs right now, they're afraid of them. If I don't fight, they'll wipe us out in a few days. Izuku spoke somewhat angrily, because some of his companions had much more physical strength than him, others more agility, but even so, it was him. He always faced danger head-on. He was the only one who worried about the others. They simply stood back and watched as a dinosaur massacred him, not wanting to help. It seems you've realized what we mean. Some of your friends are total hypocrites. Iida is very agile, Sato is very strong, and the one with the mutation quirk, well, his quirk wasn't nullified. Now the first one spoke, with some concern for the ninth one. I know, but, Izuku remained silent. It seemed he had been made to think too much about some things. Alright, guys, leave the poor kid alone, you've already overwhelmed him. Changing the subject, you'll awaken another quirk with a little more training, Degoro said, the fourth Hokage looking seriously at Nana. In a short time, OFA will evolve and you'll awaken my quirk, which is floating, so train it and take good care of it, Nana said with a smile as she approached Izuku. And don't take so many risks for others, you're worrying us a lot. Nana leaned closer to Izuku and kissed him on the forehead. Izuku felt a similar sensation to when he was with his mother, which brought a few tears to his eyes. You still have to be a great hero, Izuku. The young man had tears in his eyes. The feeling Nana reminded him of was very similar to that of his mother. He's still just a kid, after all, Degoro said, smiling as he watched the scene. Yes, he just had bad luck, the third one finished speaking. Izuku fell asleep again, then he saw his friends around him with faces of worry, astonishment, and other emotions. He looked at his body and saw that he was completely wrapped in what appeared to be leaves from a nearby tree. His wounds hurt like hell. He wanted to be sure they had cauterized them. He couldn't move his chest. He was grateful that the Therizinosaurus hadn't pierced his heart. Hello, Izuku said shyly, noticing all his friends turning to look at him. How long has it been? 3 days, Yui replied somewhat coldly. Really? The young man with green hair asked, somewhat surprised. And what happened while I was sleeping? Nothing interesting. We've just been eating the dinosaur carcass, Iida said, helping Izuku to his feet. Don't overexert yourself. I don't understand how they can eat that meat that's 3 days old, he said as he stood up, only to fall back to his knees in pain. It hurts like hell. You were brutally impaled. What did you expect? A cry of concern and anger came from a girl with colorful hair. Toru. He saw the girl who looked somewhat angry at his lack of fear of the dangers of the island. Hey idiot. The girl replied, still angry. Don't take such risks. What will we do? What will I do without you? I promised I would protect you, and I always keep my promises, smiled the boy, a smile that was contagious for everyone present. It seems there's a new couple, the boys present chuckled slightly. Some girls felt a little jealous, and others uncomfortable with the closeness between the two young people. Both boys just blushed, which made the boys laugh even more, while the girls just got a little more uncomfortable. Well, changing the subject, Izuku said, still blushing from what his friends had said earlier, we don't have time to rest. My current situation is a burden, so if any dangerous situation arises, don't hesitate to leave me. I'll do my best to buy you time. What? It was the collective cry of those present. What kind of nonsense are you talking about? The women in the group said together, somewhat annoyed by the foolishness the boy had said. Iida, you'll understand why I'm saying this. I'd be very proud if, even in my current situation, I could help you survive. So, I'm leaving you with the task of being the one to leave me if the situation arises. My raptor and I will give you time to escape in that situation, Izuku said seriously. Iida simply nodded, further enraging the girls. Don't even think about it, Iida, Jiro said angrily, frustrated that he hadn't considered their feelings. If that happens, I'll stay with you. I'd rather die than lose you. Oh, so the rocker girl is confessing her feelings, Momo said, teasing her friend to hide her jealousy. The girl blushed and was annoyed with her friend. But I agree with her, if that happens, we'll help you. I couldn't bear the guilt of that, he said, shaking his head. But well, we must continue on our way, we have a maximum of 2 days left. Izuku said and began to walk very unsteadily, the prehistoric animals following him, watching his careless gait. And so our heroes continued on their way. They had little distance left, although the end of the road was far more dangerous than anything they had faced up to that point. The dangers that awaited them were numerous and unknown. The long journey with few breaks for our heroes continued. Every day, every moment they lived close to danger, and the present is no exception. Izuku Midoriya, the group's bodyguard, was in terrible shape. He couldn't move his body much, so he was counting on his prehistoric friends to help him a little. Izuku knew that the raptor would act at the first sign of danger. The Triceratops would simply go on the defensive unless ordered to attack. What he didn't know was the reaction of the juvenile Carnotaurus. The Carnotaurus had not yet reached its adult stage, but it already measured close to 2.90 meters tall and 6.50 meters long. Although he had previously helped by attacking, now he didn't know what he would do, because after all, he was a child, and he wouldn't know how he would react to danger. But Izuku's doubt quickly vanished when he saw how, at the slightest approach, the Carnotaurus would prowl around, wiping out every living thing, from aggressive and unaware of its size Allosaurus to poor and innocent dodos. Izuku watched as the Carnotaurus approached him. He was perched on the Triceratops, back to avoid exerting himself. The Carnotaurus eagerly awaited a caress from Izuku, which he gave it. The enormous dinosaur reacted to the caress like a bird, with soft squeaks and quick movements. Alright guys, we don't have much further to go, at this rate we'll arrive in about 4 to 5 more hours. Izuku spoke from the back of the Triceratops. In about 300 meters we'll stop to rest. The last message gave everyone encouragement, as they had been walking for a while without rest, but someone spotted something in the distance at sea. An island, very similar to the one they had come from. Hey, Izuku, Kendo said, pointing at the island. Monde, Izuku said, slightly poking his head out. Isn't that the island we came from? She said, somewhat annoyed at having walked so far only to arrive at the same place. Now that I think about it, it does look quite similar. But I don't think it is, since the coastal area isn't the same. Could it be the other island on the map? Izuku took out his map and showed it to the others. They all saw a second island, but it didn't look anything like it. It looked more like a shark than a croissant. Izuku, from this angle, it really does look like a shark, Setsuna said, sounding a little animated. Some went to see and were surprised that the island really did look like a shark. Well, we won't go that way, we'll go this way. The place where we'll live is just a short walk from here, maybe we'll get there in 2 hours and 40 minutes, Izuku said while still on Triceratops' back. The rest of the journey was peaceful. The 2 hours they needed to arrive passed, and when they arrived they were surprised by what they saw. They were passing through a kind of corridor that was covered by a huge wall of natural stone on one side. At the end of said corridor, there was a kind of small crater surrounded by huge stone walls, in the center a small lagoon, and behind it a small mountain range on the shore of the lagoon. Everyone was fascinated by the beauty of the sight. There were some small ruins that gave the place a more imposing air. Everyone stood still, pondering the scene before them, when heavy footsteps pulled them from their reverie. It was the resounding footsteps of dinosaurs. The creature was escorting the Triceratops, as was the raptor, one on each side. The Triceratops' head was draped over the creature on its back, and atop this Cretaceous being sat Izuku. Okay, this is where we'll live. This place is nice and safe, so get your things settled. We'll make a campfire and set up the cabin. I'll look for food. Everyone nodded and did their own thing. Izuku left with all the reptiles by his side. It didn't take long for him to find some prey. The area was quite populated by large reptiles. A hunt lasting just over 40 minutes was enough to get food for all his companions. I took it there and they did what had become routine, cutting and cooking the meat directly over the fire. They ate, and once they had regained their energy, each one went about his business. Izuku took charge of planning a new cabin, not too big and simple enough to build in just a few weeks. Thus began the collection of materials with the help of the horned quadruped, which knocked down large and resistant logs and moved them at the same time. The Carnotaurus helped in carrying logs that were not very heavy and at the same time in protecting the Triceratops. The raptor was in charge of protecting Izuku while he cut small logs. The day ended with everyone sleeping while gazing at a beautiful starry sky. In the middle of the ocean, an island once ruled by a giant spider was engulfed in flames. The fire rapidly consumed all the spiders, large and small. The shrieks of spiders being consumed by the flames could be heard. Green blood was spilled across the entire island, and an intense battle raged in its center. The enormous spider fought against a gigantic dragon. The battle lasted for hours and hours. In the end, the dragon left, thus ending the fight. The spider roared with anger as it looked at what it thought would be its prey. In the gigantic snowy mountains, a huge gorilla with white fur and scars on both its chest and face was seen growling and beating its chest, trying to scare away whatever was in front of it. In front of him was something strange. It was a simple hologram made of polygons. It quickly launched a beam at the gorilla, who, unable to do anything to stop it, was consumed by it. Seconds later, the gorilla's pounding on his chest echoed throughout the Nevada region of the island. Izuku continued collecting materials. It was late at night, but he was still doing his thing. Then, during a short break, he gazed at the bright, starry sky as he remembered his home. He didn't know if he now preferred that place or being in the city. His thoughts were cut short by an intense whistling sound in the distance, and seconds later he saw a huge silhouette fly over his position at tremendous speed. Then he heard the roar of whatever it was. This was followed by an intense shriek that he recognized as that of the spider, sending a shiver down his spine. And then there was the pounding in his chest that echoed throughout the place, reminding him of a gorilla, but from the force he deduced that it was of abysmal proportions. I knew more and more that this island wasn't a game. If they wanted to survive, they had to abandon the games and take the place they were in seriously. Director, it's been a long time since they disappeared. We can no longer continue the search. A hero spoke before the most intelligent being in the world. I know, it's the last week. If they don't turn up this week, cancel the search. The director barely managed to deliver his verdict. Understood. The teacher left the rodent's office. As he closed the door, a bang was heard. Damn it, Shigaraki, where the hell are my students? The rodent's scream echoed through the office. Calm down, Nezu. They've probably been taken to a remote place far from Japan. The director decided to turn on the television in his office to unwind, and he started watching a documentary about the sea. The documentary touched on many topics about the sea, but the most interesting one. Point Nemo. Upon learning about this place, Nezu began to investigate it. From what he knew, it was the most remote place on Earth, so much so that the ways to reach it were very limited. Ships and helicopters. Nezu immediately remembered that his students had been kidnapped in a helicopter, thanks to the security cameras at the location. I immediately dialed a number on his phone. Hello, officer, I request that you please send a plane to fly over this area. The director spoke over the phone and then sent an image and coordinates of the location. Thank you. She ended the call, put down her phone, and looked out the window. I hope you are all well, young people. The director's words conveyed his deep concern for his students. Izuku, wake up, I'm hungry, were the shouts of a girl shaking the green-haired boy from side to side. Mina, don't bother him, he's very tired, another girl scolded Mina, who just huffed. Upon hearing that name, the boy woke up immediately. There he saw her, the girl he had once seen die before his eyes. Unconsciously, her eyes watered, surprising the girls. Without saying much, she just hugged the pink-haired girl who didn't know what was happening. What's wrong, Midoriya? Why are you crying? The pink-haired girl said, sounding worried about her friend. It's nothing, I just had a bad dream. The boy smiled as he left, his spear and bow in hand. The day passed exactly as Izuku remembered, until the moment of Mina's death. There they all were, facing the Giganotosaurus, and the girl was ready to run away. As she was about to run, the green-haired one grabbed her arm and threw her to the ground. Don't you dare run! The green-haired boy's shout startled the girl. Stay right there. Ignoring him, the girl ran away. The scene unfolded exactly as Izuku remembered it. Just as the dinosaur was about to swallow her, the green hair woke up excitedly. Ah, ah! The young man sighed, somewhat agitated. Looking around he saw that it was still night. Still agitated he got up. Without much enthusiasm, he grabbed his bow and spear, and without a fixed destination, he walked and walked, seeing many dinosaurs that would impress him at first glance, but he was already used to seeing many of these. He also saw some insects and some large mammals. Without paying attention, he continued walking, not even knowing if he wanted to hunt or simply walk. After 15 minutes of walking, he managed to see the sun rising. A beautiful reddish sunrise with orange tones embellished the view of the sea. But a loud, thunderous sound snapped him out of his trance. Searching for the source of the sound, he looked up. There was a huge metal piece hovering above the area. He knew it. He was close to finding them. The green-haired creature didn't know what to feel. Normally he would have been excited. No more hunting, no more constant danger, no more dinosaurs. The green-haired one realized something. He didn't want to leave. On this island he managed to advance much more than he did in the city. On this island he was much happier than he was in the city. But at the same time, she wanted to see her mother, hug her, tell her everything that happened, cry with her, let it all out. Once the plane left, Izuku decided it was time to hunt for something for his breakfast. He continued on his way, seeing small herds of dinosaurs, but he ignored them, not wanting any trouble with a herd. Along the way, he came across a Carnotaurus accompanied by several young. Izuku remembered the time he took the egg. It was the same Carnotaurus. They looked at each other. Izuku prepared to fight, while the Carnotaurus just kept looking at him. A few more minutes passed and neither of them did anything. When the enormous reptile lowered its head slightly and left the place, ignoring the young man. The boy sighed, continued walking, and found two Triceratops. He shot an arrow at one of them, aiming for its eye. A roar of pain accompanied the impact. Faced with this, the Triceratops fell to the ground still alive but without its eyesight at its full capacity. The other Triceratops charged towards Izuku. He simply moved to the side and the Ceratopsian ran past, crashing into a tree where its horns became embedded. Izuku took advantage of this and stabbed the dinosaur's back several times. Blood flowed constantly. The quadruped was unable to pull its horns out of the trunk, its groans of pain echoing through the forest. When they stopped, Izuku checked that the dinosaur wasn't alive and in one swift motion tried to pull its horns out of the tree. He couldn't. Several attempts yielded nothing. He took out his axe and struck the horn several times, until it gave way and broke. He repeated the process with the other one, who likewise yielded after a few blows. He saw the other Triceratops still lying on the ground while its eyes bled profusely. Not wanting to see it suffer anymore, he stabbed it directly in the chest with the spear. Using his quirk, he hoisted both corpses onto his back. The journey was peaceful but difficult. After all, he was carrying at least 2 tons of flesh and bones on his back. What he never expected was to hear a scream. A scream that sounded very familiar. I ignored it and continued on my way without another word. Once again, the scream was heard, now echoing off the stones beside me. A few meters further on, it was heard again. A resounding scream of utter terror. The owner of such a scream would be unable to speak for the next few days. That is, if he survived. As he neared his camp, he saw something that puzzled him, a cave. This cave emitted green smoke from within. Izuku knew it was poison in gaseous form. I ignored it. I didn't have the resources to go in yet. Now that I think about it, there were many minerals on the island. He continued on his way, thinking of many ways to mine those minerals, always arriving at a simple pickaxe, but after obtaining them there was the task of smelting them. Ah, the young man sighed heavily, how I wish May were here. He said this because, although his intellect was high, May's creativity was incomparable. He continued walking and arrived at his camp, saw everyone asleep, and smiled peacefully. Sometimes he felt like the father of a huge family. He saw some branches moving in an unnatural way, and then he saw a Carnotaurus enter the area. With little choice, he ran towards it, spear in hand. He wanted to practice a little, and that large reptile would be his practice dummy. Although the fight was short-lived, as the green-haired one used his quirk, quickly killing the carnivorous biped, it was very noisy, waking several of those who were previously asleep. Izuku. I speak lazily, kendo-like. Oh, did I wake you? Sorry. A Carnotaurus appeared, but I've already finished it off. He smiled simply and the girl nodded, going back to sleep as if nothing had happened. If I'm not mistaken, there are still 2 hours until dawn, the young man said, looking at the moon that was about to set. With nothing else to do, he set about testing his theory, combining a stick with the horns of the Triceratops of old and a vine to make a somewhat primitive but functional beak. He proudly surveyed his new acquisition, and seeing a round stone in the distance near the lagoon in the center of the valley, he decided to try the pickaxe. He struck it, the stone bounced off the blow, causing Izuku's arms to hurt. He struck it a second time, a small crack appeared on the surface of the rock. Each blow damaged the stone a little more, until the green-haired one decided to use his quirk. When he used it, the stone exploded into many pieces, but his pickaxe also suffered the consequences. The stick he used as a handle broke in half and the horn shattered into several pieces. He saw the pieces of rock and grabbed them, examining each one in detail, separating those with iron from those with flint and simple minerals. He had approximately 700 grams of iron-containing stones. He approached a tree with his axe in hand and felled it. He split the trunk into pieces and with these pieces made a primitive oven structure, then covered it with leaves and later with mud. He placed pieces of dry wood inside and lit them. The oven began to heat up rapidly, the leaves and wood inside burned and fused with the clay, which solidified quickly due to the temperature. Izuku stopped to think for a moment. How will I shape the metal? How will I extract the metal? He asked himself several questions related to the metal he was about to melt, and after a while he came to a conclusion. With the remains of the broken Triceratops horn he made a kind of mace attached to a stick with several vines intertwined with each other. With a few stones and more mud, he made a flat surface where he could freely mold the molten iron. Now there was only one thing missing. The mold for the iron. This was a bit complicated, as I didn't have many things resistant to high temperatures. Clay was an option, but the mold would be single-use, as it would break after used due to the pressure of the blows. With little choice, he surrounded each iron stone with mud and put them in the oven, plugged the entrance with a rock and filled it with mud so that the heat would not escape. And he simply sat and waited. While he waited he sharpened his spear, practiced with his bow. He also made a kind of needle from a small bone of a dinosaur he had previously killed. Although it was rather large for a needle, it served its purpose. With the help of the skin he had saved from the beginning and some vines, he made several garments for his friends, as they were about to be completely naked. The clothes were dreadful, they were poorly aligned, unattractive, and the sizes didn't match up, but they served their main purpose. When this was over, he saw how the oven began to break down, cracks began to appear from which a lot of smoke came out. Izuku knew it. The smoke was generating a lot of pressure, since it didn't provide an escape route. With his axe, he made a small hole in the bottom. Once he did, a large burst of very hot smoke came out and the pressure inside ceased. Just getting close to the oven made you feel the heat. If you touched it, you would burn your hand. Izuku, believing it was time to take out the molten iron, removed the rock covering the furnace. He saw that all the wood had turned to ash. Not even embers remained, but inside it was very hot. He saw some small mounds of red-hot clay, smiled proudly, and with the handle of his spear pushed it out of the oven. He had made some tweezers that were just pieces of wood that worked similarly to chopsticks, only the pressure they exerted was from a vine. I grabbed some of the molten iron with the tongs and hit it hard. His quirk helped him a lot, so he easily molded the piece of iron into a flat square. Using the clamps that held it, he lowered it into the water. The water around it evaporated quickly, and the iron square cooled, regaining its color. When the young man saw the color, his proud smile vanished, for apparently there were pieces that did not shine. It was not pure iron, it was iron with some calcium and other minerals. He saw this as insufficient, but it was what he had, so he sharpened it with some porous rocks that were nearby and tied a stick to it, making it now an iron axe. Wanting to test it, he went to a nearby tree, hit the tree, and saw how the axe felled the thin tree with a single blow. She knew that having more minerals wouldn't affect its usefulness, only its strength and appearance, so she had to be careful every time she used it. It wasn't easy to make. He continued doing the same thing for the next hour. In that time he managed to make the tip of his spear metal and very sharp. Some arrows were also made of metal, although there were few of them, only 4 were metal. Everything else remained the same, as impure metal was difficult to obtain in that area. Of all the pieces of metal, only one was pure metal. He used this to make 2 iron plates which he placed on his knuckles. If they were unarmed and fought with their fists, their blows would be more painful and stronger. The furnace didn't stagnate. Each time it melted a piece, it improved a little, now capable of reaching high temperatures without cracking or releasing much heat. Izuku looked at his clay oven and wondered if he could build a house the same way. But right now he didn't feel like doing it, so watching the beautiful sunrise and proud to finally have something decent, he watched his friends wake up with huge smiles. Each one woke up slowly at his own pace, all greeting their friend, noticing that he had replaced his primitive axe with a more sophisticated one. "Where did you get that iron axe?" Momo asked, confused. "I made it." Izuku smiled as he stepped aside, revealing the oven and all the rocks scattered around the area. "Seriously? That's great," Uraraka exclaimed excitedly. "No more stone tools. Calm down a bit. Iron is hard to come by. Everything I managed to get was full of impurities, only a small piece was pure iron," Izuku said, showing the iron plates on his fists, "so metal tools will be scarce." They all nodded and then looked at Izuku, waiting for him to do something. "I know what you want. Behind the oven there are 2 corpses, eat them, you know you leave me the skin and bones." Izuku spoke and everyone went to get firewood to make a bonfire. Izuku saw this and had an idea. Just like he made the oven, with wood, covered with leaves and coated with mud, he made a kind of grill, a little high enough so he wouldn't have to be crouching. "Sato, come here, I have a surprise for you." Izuku smiled and the aforementioned approached with green hair. "What do you want to show me?" the boy with the big lips asked, confused. "Look." He pointed to what he had done a few seconds ago and Sato looked at him confused. "What is that?" I asked, watching as the still liquid mud trickled and dripped all over the structure. "Wait and see." Izuku lit the firewood under the grill, which quickly escalated into an intense blaze that rapidly evaporated all the mud water, leaving everything solid. "Your new kitchen." Sato just smiled and placed a flat stone over the flames to cook the meat. Izuku reviewed his progress for the day. Although the day wasn't over yet, it had been very productive, at least for him. With a new project in mind, He got to work. Everyone watched as Izuku cut down tree after tree. The entire surrounding area was deforested. He began cutting the long, thin logs into lengths of approximately 2.3 meters. Once I finished cutting, there were 10 logs of this size. He smiled and cut the remaining logs into 1.8 meters pieces. There were approximately 20 of these. The green hair began to bury the 2.3 meter logs in a square pattern, leaving a space similar to its height between each one. Once the logs were finished, he began to place the 1.8 meters logs. These were placed 1.7 meters away from the larger logs and with almost 2 meters of space between them, maintaining the square shape. This job had taken her a few hours. She still hadn't finished placing the logs when one of her colleagues approached her. "What are you doing?" asked a girl with purple hair. I'm trying to make a hut with mud, leaves, and logs." "I think I'll manage," Izuku said as he buried another log. The green-haired man was sweating profusely, and his leather shirt wasn't helping. With few options, he removed it, leaving his body exposed, his sweat running down every one of his well-defined muscles. This sight was a visual delight for many of the women in the group, especially those belonging to her class. The purple-haired girl couldn't continue her conversation. Her concentration went out the window when she saw the freckled boy's physique. "If you'll excuse me, I'll continue working," Izuku said as he dug a hole to bury another log. A previously invisible girl hugged the boy's back, pressing her breasts against his back. Izuku greeted her and then moved aside to continue working, all under the watchful eyes of most of the women in the group, because with every minimal effort the freckled boy exerted, his muscles flexed, appearing larger than before. "Director, the place you sent us to has an island." "What? That place is uninhabited by any terrestrial life," exclaimed the rodent in surprise. "Quick! Send a top hero to explore the area." But it's just an island." "That's an order." With no other options, the hero nodded and sent the director's order to the Hero Association, which simply confirmed it. During the next few days there were no more flights close to the island. They discussed which hero would go to the island. The top 5 were out of the question since they were the ones keeping Musudafu safe. By process of elimination, 3 candidates were chosen: Mirko, Yukio, and Nimari. Since they weren't part of the top 5 and didn't rely heavily on their quirks, they were good options. So, unable to reach an agreement, they decided it would be 3 o'clock. It had been a long flight. The sounds of the plane had already tired the rabbit. "How much longer?" In the most childish style, the rabbit heroine threw a sort of tantrum. "I want to get down from here already." "Relax, I just have patience," a blonde girl said calmly, contrasting with her friend's personality. "We've arrived at our destination," the pilot announced, and the heroines grabbed a parachute. Once the heroines jumped, they opened their parachutes and landed safely on Earth, getting a glimpse of the island. They saw the plane that brought them one last time. They only saw as a huge projectile struck it and exploded into many pieces. "What the hell?" Mirko shouted, surprised by the sudden explosion. "The driver," Nimari exclaimed worriedly, shielding herself from the explosion. Minutes passed and the shockwave subsided. The trio of heroines observed a minute of silence out of respect for the pilot of the plane. Once they tried to start walking, they felt something in their feet. They felt their energy being stolen. They looked down and some rays were sucking something from their bodies. Then a bullet struck each of them and they fell unconscious. While Izuku was building the hut, a crowd of girls watched his every move, blushing. The green-haired boy, like his companions, heard a huge explosion coming from the southern part of the island. He quickly considered the possibility that they had brought more people to the island, so without thinking he ran towards his raptor, grabbed his spear and bow, left a wooden spear for the boys to defend themselves, and sped off. Everyone looked confused, but simply ignored it and started eating breakfast. The green-haired man only saw some fire above the sea. He guessed that's where the explosion would come from, accelerated the raptor's pace, and in a matter of hours they had arrived. When he arrived he saw 3 heroines. How on earth did those scoundrels capture 3 heroines? He moved closer. What he saw froze him to the spot. They were naked. Wait, if they were naked, it means that while they were being brought there, it's possible they were raped. Izuku looked at them sadly. Little by little, one of them woke up. The rabbit heroine stood up, somewhat bewildered. Izuku looked into her eyes and smiled. She jumped in fright at the sight of the student they were all searching for, causing a mesmerizing movement in her breasts, a movement that captivated the green-haired boy. He looked away, blushing. She began to undress, while extending her clothes to the heroine, who, without understanding, took them. "What's this for, child?" I asked, not knowing why I was giving him his clothes, which looked more like rags. Suddenly a breeze brushed against her intimate area. This was more than enough, plus the blush of her green hair. She understood everything. He turned around, walked behind a tree, put on his clothes, and kicked the tree, which shook violently from side to side. "What are you doing here, boy?" the heroine asked, trying to forget what had happened before. "Well, trying to survive," the green-haired man said, sounding somewhat exhausted. "Let's wait for them to wake up so we can give them clothes and go join the others." "What else?" the heroine asked, confused. "Yes, there are about 20 of us. It's difficult to keep them alive, but we do what we can." The green-haired woman smiled. "Oh, it seems they're waking up." The heroines woke up, looked around, and then saw the boy, who blushed again at the bouncing of the women's breasts. Something similar happened, except that the boy's former teacher made advances towards him, causing more than one person to blush. "Nimari, stop, the boy needs to explain several things to us," said the blonde heroine, still naked, covering her private parts. "You're such a spoilsport," the teacher complained, shamelessly displaying her body. "You're an exhibitionist," the blonde replied, much to the teacher's anger. "What did you say, dyed blonde?" "You heard me, you masochist." "There they go again," Mirko complained. The fact that they were both with you made Yukio act similarly to the aforementioned girl. She was constantly fighting with the raven-haired girl. "Shut up, you stupid pair. You're giving the boy a show." The two heroines saw each other. Their bodies, which they had previously covered, were now completely exposed and pressed very close together, causing the boy to blush deeply. They both separated and covered themselves again. Well, the blonde covered herself, then the young man with green hair coughed falsely and cleared his throat. "Okay, quirks don't work on this island. There are dinosaurs, and there's no communication," the boy said somewhat sheepishly, as he had two naked heroines in front of him. "First of all, put these on." He held out two slightly poorly made leather shirts. Both heroines were grateful. The shirt was enough to cover their bodies below the knees. They talked for a while. The green-haired girl explained everything that was happening on the island, something that obviously surprised the heroines. "Do you expect me to believe there are dinosaurs on this island?" Mirko asked, not believing the boy. "Yes, Miss Mirko, this island has animals from previous centuries, like the dodo, and even creatures from the Cretaceous period." She smiled slightly, then whistled. "This is strange for heroines." "Why are you whistling?" "You'll see." A few seconds later, the raptor came out from behind Izuku, knocking him down and starting to lick his face. "Okay, get off, you're heavy." With some effort, he moved the biped off him. The heroines watched in surprise, as the boy was playing with a supposedly extinct creature as if it were a dog. Suddenly, a noise startled everyone. It sounded like powerful footsteps. Judging by the sound, it seemed to be coming from a quadruped. Izuku positioned himself in front of the heroines. They didn't understand. They saw him pull a spear and a bow from his back. "Does anyone have good accuracy?" I asked, and Nimari, who raised her hand, received the bow and a few arrows. "Shoot the metal ones first." The teacher nodded without questioning how the arrows contained metal. The sound of footsteps grew louder. The somewhat frightened heroines were still ready to attack if necessary. When the footsteps stopped, a great roar that sent chills through everyone present was heard. Then a huge snout tried to take the green hair in one bite. He examined the shape of the snout in detail, and then the teeth. "Spinosaurus," I say, confusing the women behind me, "a quadruped that can also be bipedal. Its front paws are claws, so be very careful." The green-haired girl, without giving much thought to the consequences, went straight for the attack, under the surprised gaze of the heroines who, although in shock, remained alert. A scream snapped the three of them out of their shock. They saw how the green-haired girl had suffered a claw mark on her chest. The mark of 3 claws running from right to left in an upward motion was on her chest, bleeding profusely. The green-haired one simply grunted while whistling to his friend who fearlessly attacked the all-terrain dinosaur. While they fought, the green-haired one stepped back to compose himself and saw the heroines behind him. Mirko, here, the green-haired boy gave his spear to the rabbit who looked at him confused. I'll clear a path for you to attack. The rabbit nodded somewhat fearfully. After all, rabbits are not predators of spinosaurs. The boy sighed, relaxed his body and let his power flow, launching himself into a flurry of blows. Without any weapon he struck the great dinosaur wherever he could. The dinosaur did not give in, as its weight and strength gave it an advantage over its two enemies, so the wounds they inflicted were not a big problem. The green-haired girl who kept hitting saw her teacher with the bow in her hand. It wasn't loaded or anything, her hand was just trembling. She saw the rabbit girl who was in the same state. She thought it would be different than with her friends, since these were professional heroines, but it seemed she wouldn't receive much help. "Fuck!" yelled the green-haired one as he ran towards Nimari. Without warning, he snatched the bow from her hand and a metal arrow, quickly drew the bow and fired a precise shot at the dinosaur's head. "Die already, you son of a bitch!" The dinosaur roared in pain. The arrow had pierced a large part of its head. The green-haired one fired his 3 remaining metal arrows, which pierced almost completely through the dinosaur's chest. The boy's teacher was startled when she felt her bow being snatched away. Then she saw the green-haired boy shoot all the arrows without any fear. She felt useless, because she hadn't been able to help her student. "Mirko, the damn spear!" The green-haired one extended his hand to the rabbit, who didn't respond. Her instinct told her to run away. "Damn it!" He approached and snatched the spear from the rabbit, who reacted just as strongly as the black-haired one. "How can you not help me? Just stay back!" the green-haired one shouted, somewhat angrily. The trio of heroines felt useless, as a young man was fighting for them, even though they were the heroines. Ryaku, even though she hadn't heard a single scream from the green-haired one, also felt unwell, but they weren't used to fighting dinosaurs. The fight with the green-haired one, now that he had his spear, became bloodier. A diagonal cut appeared on the dinosaur's chest. The dinosaur tried to bite him, but he moved and slashed its stomach. A tail whip hit the green-haired one, sending him crashing into a tree. He groaned in pain from his chest wound and the blow he had just received. He saw his captor lying on the ground, wounded all over his body, so he couldn't help. He would surely survive, but he had no way to help his master. He huffed in anger and lunged again to attack the dinosaur. The dinosaur roared and charged in kind. The green-haired boy dodged all of the dinosaur's swipes and bites. Due to its size, the dinosaur found it difficult to evade all of the green-haired boy's attacks, and so it gradually gave way, much to the delight of the boy and the heroines. About 10 minutes of bloody combat ensued, but finally the great carnivore fell. A heavy thud hit the ground, signaling that the enormous carnivore had finally yielded. In true prehistoric style, the green-haired creature let out a cry of victory. When the fight finally ended, the boy whistled at his captor, who, although injured, approached the green-haired boy. The boy held onto his friend and approached the heroines, looking at them seriously before letting out a big sigh. "I'm sorry for yelling at you. I was angry because I expected help from you. After all, you are, well, you were professional heroines, so I guess I was a little disappointed." The green-haired girl's smile contrasted sharply with what she was saying. Her words of apology were more hurtful than the yelling itself. "Please forgive us for not helping," the dragon said calmly, for she understood the boy even though his words made her feel bad. "All right, let's go to our camp." The green-haired boy, still standing thanks to his friend, started walking towards the place he'd come from. It wasn't a long walk, but they wouldn't get there in 10 minutes. He had to be ready for anything. A silent path, beyond the boy's groans of pain from the swipe he received on his chest, was otherwise silent. The young man knew his wound wouldn't heal easily, it could even become infected quickly. He thought about it for a moment and sighed. He didn't want to have to resort to that again. "Midnight, Yukio and Mirko, could you please find some firewood?" the young man asked the heroines, who nodded somewhat confused. "Okay, but call us by our names, kid, after all, we'll be living together now," joked the boy's teacher, much to his embarrassment. "Okay," he nodded, slightly blushing. She gave her axe to the heroines, and Rumi took it to chop down a tree with just 2 blows. She was surprised by how sharp the axe was, but she continued with what she was doing, now splitting the tree into pieces. The two remaining heroines gathered dry branches that had fallen from some trees and took them to the boy. "What are you going to do?" Ryoko asked the young man, who only gave her a frightened look. "Cauterize my wounds." The heroines opened their eyes in surprise. No young person that age would ever think of doing that, even some adults were afraid of the subject. "Do you know how to do it?" the boy's teacher asked, and he just nodded. "After that we'll sleep here and resume our journey tomorrow," the young man said, trying to change the subject. The heroines nodded. The rabbit didn't like it, but the boy showed his superiority when it came to fighting threats on the island. He had to be the leader. The green-haired boy lit the campfire with some friction. Although it took him a while, he managed it in a few minutes. The heroines watched as the wood they had brought was lit, while the boy simply prepared himself for the pain. Once the bonfire was fully lit, the boy grabbed a wooden stick that was red-hot at one end. To the heroines' concern, they saw the boy bring the burning stick close to the wounds on his chest. The boy, having at least a minimal amount of experience in this, grabbed the metal plate from his fist and placed it between his teeth. Although he hesitated a little, he took the dragon's hand, which blushed slightly at the touch, but she knew it was a way to deflect the pain. Now prepared, the young man, without thinking, placed the burning piece of wood against his chest. Muffled screams, moans of pain, and numerous grimaces of pain only showed that the confinement hurt the young man. This was what the trio of heroines witnessed during the next 10 minutes. Ryoku's hand went numb from the force the young man exerted on it. She could only observe the young man's pain with concern. The young man finally and permanently removed the burning piece of wood from his chest and began to gasp. He was sweating profusely and his chest still hurt, but his wounds would now heal faster. He stood up and let go of the blonde's hand. She felt strange when she stopped feeling the young man's touch, but she followed him with her eyes. The three heroines watched as the boy grabbed a few leaves and washed them with seawater before placing them on his now cauterized wound. "Let's continue," said the green-haired one, struggling to walk with his carnivorous friend behind him. The journey was silent. In a few more hours they arrived at the camp. They were surprised to find many of the lost students there. They saw them cooking meat, and the heroines' stomachs growled, much to their embarrassment. "I'll make you some sleeping bags," asked Sato for food. The green-haired girl pointed to a muscular young man with black hair and the heroines nodded. The green-haired boy made sleeping bags out of leaves and hides and gave them to the heroines, who thanked him for it. The boy then turned to continue what he had started. The boy continued with the small hut, but upon closer inspection, he decided to tear it all down. It was obvious it would collapse as soon as he put mud on the walls. He needed to use better construction techniques. He thought for a few minutes and came up with the idea of stacking the logs to create a wall and holding them up with ropes and pillars. Wanting to test his idea, he cut down a few trees to cut them into pieces and stack them up, then tied them together at the ends, thus making a sturdy wall. He made a few more in the same way, starting to join them by interlocking them. He left a few protruding so they would fit against another wall, and that's how he joined them. He saw that it worked and was stronger than he had planned, so he tried to put them directly on the ground, but he couldn't. The walls always fell. He thought that perhaps it was the lack of a foundation to hold them up, but there wasn't much time since it was almost nightfall. The Triceratops and Carnotaurus he had hunted that morning were more than enough to eat all day. The productive day for the green-haired man had ended. Now the number of people he had to feed was greater, and that worried him, but he couldn't let them starve. Pushing that thought out of his mind, he settled down to eat and chat animatedly with his friends. The heroines didn't know how to join the conversation. After all, they were adults and didn't know much about what young people talked about these days. The most they could do was join the girls' conversation, since their topics of conversation never change. Clothes, makeup, boys, gossip, a little bit of everything. Seeing that his family was now bigger, Izuku smiled and went to sleep first because he was tired from everything that had happened during the day. At the UA there were many reporters while on a stage the professors and the director were present. "Nezu, what do you plan to do to recover those students who were kidnapped?" one of the reporters asked, and the entire press corps fell silent. "We've already started taking different steps regarding this problem," flying over various areas where we think they might be, and we believe we've located them. We just have no way to get there," the director said seriously as reporters pointed microphones and cell phones at him. "To ensure the safety of the young people, we're sending a trio of heroines, so if they're in danger, they'll take care of them." The press continued with similar questions, and after a couple of hours the press dispersed. From a bar located somewhere unknown, the screen the press was watching went black, only to show a man with a mask on the same television screen seconds later, and outside of it a group of several people. "As you saw, they discovered your location," the man on the screen said seriously. "Don't worry, Master, if those heroes manage to reach the island, you only need to nullify their powers," smiled maliciously, a boy with light blue hair and several hands attached to his body. "No, Shigaraki, you're not understanding the seriousness of the matter. If they send All Might, even I would be in trouble. That's why I went ahead." The screen stopped showing the man and began to show something else. "Oh, I like the idea, Master. When do we put it into action?" Tamura asked the man on the screen, who smiled beneath his helmet. "Patience, Tamura, patience. This project cost me a lot of money, and I also collected many important favors, all for your growth. But don't worry, make as many mistakes as you want, I'll support you." The man smiled beneath his mask, as did the young man with light blue hair. All the inhabitants of the prehistoric island were sleeping, as peacefully as ever. How could they not be, with two carnivores and a large herbivore covering them and also a burly green-haired creature with newly discovered anger issues watching over them and keeping them alive and healthy. Speaking of that green hair, he was breaking stones with an improvised flint pickaxe. It took a lot of effort to break the stones, but he obtained minimal amounts of metals that he collected until he got 1 kilogram. The job took him approximately 1 hour and 30 minutes. He looked at the pieces of metal with pride. He used his axe, which was slowly losing its edge, to cut down some trees and fuel his furnace, which he used to melt metals. While feeding the fire, he thought about what tool he could make. He opted for the most obvious one, a pickaxe. He began to make the mold and repeat the method he used to make his first metal tools. Time passed, the metal was already molten and it was just a matter of shaping it. He grabbed the mallet and began to strike it, his blows powered by his quirk. With one of the blows, I noticed that the piece of metal had torn. Frustrated, I picked it up and put it in the water. Large amounts of steam came out around it, and when it cooled, I saw that it had indeed torn. He sighed in frustration. He would have to melt it down again and repeat the whole process. He looked at the sky. The sun was already peeking out, which meant his companions must be close to waking up. He took his spear and bow and put them on his back. His stone knife that he had kept since the first day was in its sheath. He fastened his precious necklace firmly. He put his metal plates on his fists and without further ado he whistled and called his raptor. They both looked at each other for a few seconds. Izuku was lost in thought for a moment. Then he saw the Triceratops and the Carnotaurus behind him, and an idea came to him. He looked at the Triceratops for a moment, then he looked at the Carnotaurus. Both had grown abnormally in a short time. His idea was to create saddles and a cargo cart for the Triceratops, and for the Carnotaurus, only a saddle. He interrupted his thoughts. Everything he was thinking about would take some time to do. "Calm down, Izuku. First things first, food. Then you can do all your crazy stuff," the boy told himself as he called the Carnotaurus to eat. So the boy and the giant reptiles went hunting. It only took them a few minutes to find a herd large enough to feed everyone in the group for half a month. That's when another idea popped into the boy's mind. "A refrigerator," the boy said, analyzing the odds of the refrigerator working. The idea was simple. "I'll try the Zir refrigerator, but I'll add salt." The boy charged at the pack. There were only a few gallimimus, so apart from the time it took to catch them, the rest was easy. "Now I realize. How the hell am I going to manage all this?" the boy said, looking at the 8 gallimimus corpses. "You each take one, then there are 6 left." He looked at the corpses while deciding how to bring them back. "I can carry them, but it's a lot of weight. Will you carry them on your back?" he asked, looking at the horned carnivore who didn't understand what his master meant. "Yes, that's best." He gave the Carnotaurus the order to crouch down and it did, or rather lay down, and he hoisted the corpses onto its back. Somewhat uncomfortable due to the extra weight, the dinosaur stood up and began to follow his master in the direction of his home. Just minutes after arriving, the green-haired boy stopped at the seashore and filled his bottle with sand and water. So they resumed their journey. Once they arrived, to the boy's surprise, no one was awake, as the sun had already risen and should have disturbed the young people's sleep. Without dwelling on the matter any longer, he got to work with his refrigerator. Using some clay he found nearby, he made 2 pots, one larger than the other. He waited a few minutes until they were completely dry, cleaned off the remaining soil, and shook his bottle of water and sand so the sand would mix with the salt in the water. He put the sand and salt in the larger pot, making a layer about 5 centimeters thick. Then, inside the larger pot, he placed the smaller pot in the center. Around the edges, he added more sand and salt. He constantly added water to the sand and salt until it was completely moist. He took his UAT shirt, tore it, dampened it, and covered the small pot. He waited a few minutes for the moisture from the sand and salt to turn into steam, drawing heat into the small pot, and then placed the meat inside. If I'm not mistaken, that's enough, although I need to keep the sand and salt moist. I know. Just like in an animated series, a light bulb went off in the head of the green-haired boy and he quickly ran towards a part of the crater, in which there were some pieces of bamboo. This should do. When he picked up the bamboo fibers pricked him, making him groan in pain. We have to polish them first. The young man cut the bamboos and carefully split them in half, leaving a hollow in the middle. He also used the edge of his axe to remove the hairs from the bamboo, making it easier to handle. All the noise the green-haired boy was making woke several of his friends up, but not wanting to interrupt, they watched as he worked so happily. For the girls, it was quite a sight. Since the boy wasn't wearing a shirt, he used his shirt to cover the refrigerator so nothing would happen to the meat, so he was working half naked. For the boys, it was seeing their friends striving to make their lives easier, some of them feeling useless. The green-haired boy who had finished cutting the bamboos began to make a small channel in the queen where he placed the bamboos. In these he directed the water from the lagoon to a hole in the pot and thus the water flowed and the sand absorbed it, remaining moist without the need for the green-haired boy. The boy smiled with satisfaction, wiped some sweat from his brow, and turned to look at his sleeping friends, noticing that they were awake and some of the girls were blushing. He smiled in his own unique way, and also gestured to Sato, who understood and stood up. "Before you cook, Sato, I want to show you something," the green-haired boy said, and everyone paid attention. "As you may have noticed, I made a water channel from the lagoon to that flower pot." He emphasized the quotation marks, leaving his companions intrigued. "Well then, let me introduce you to our refrigerator," he said enthusiastically, pointing at it with both hands. "Refrigerator?" Kendo asked, sounding somewhat disappointed. "That's right," replied the green-haired man proudly. "It's a little..." The previously invisible girl was about to speak. "It's a refrigerator disappointment," said the ever-serious and direct Yui. "Don't be so direct," Setsuna scolded as she watched the green hair fall down her back. "Don't believe him, Midoriya. It's a fantastic refrigerator." Komori tried to comfort the boy who had a depressive aura around him. The boy was about to speak, but he was interrupted by the raven-haired girl from Clase who was looking closely at the refrigerator. "Zier's fridge," the girl said, surprised, which cheered up the green-haired boy. "You noticed?" the animated green-haired boy exclaimed as the girl nodded, still surprised. "You're a genius, Izuku," the raven-haired girl complimented, and the green-haired boy smiled with even more satisfaction. The raven-haired girl would have continued flattering the boy if it weren't for the purple-haired girl who interrupted. "All right, Brainiacs, we get it, you know everything. Now explain, what do you mean by Zier refrigerator?" Jiro said, separating the two boys and asking his question. "You see, the Zier refrigerator, or clay refrigerator, works very simply. You need 2 clay buckets or pots, one large enough to fit the other inside, leaving a 5 centimeters gap from the edges. They shouldn't have any holes. Fill the larger one with sand up to 5 centimeters, place the smaller pot in the center, and fill the edges with sand. Cover it with a damp stick and keep the sand moist," the green-haired girl explained, receiving nods of agreement from the raven-haired girl. "The way it works is even simpler. The damp sand draws heat from the center of the pot, and the water that keeps it damp evaporates. Then the steam escapes along with all the heat from inside the pot. The raven-haired woman spoke, her green hair complementing her words with gestures of settlement. Also, add salt to the sand. The raven-haired girl's eyes lit up. The salt in the sand lowers the evaporation rate, making the cooling process faster and keeping the temperature inside lower and longer, the green-haired boy explained, slightly opening the refrigerator to reveal everything the two boys had said. The bamboo channel keeps the sand moist automatically. It's about 10 degrees Celsius inside the small pot, the green-haired boy explained, uncovering the small pot and reaching inside to check the temperature. So, anything that might spoil goes in there, and it'll last a little longer. The brainy duo finished speaking while receiving a few cheers from some, while others didn't understand what they meant. What did they say? I didn't understand anything. Mirko, the heroine, spoke, confused. Silly rabbit, whispered the heroine Yukio. In short, it's cold in the center of that cube, the heroine summarized very briefly, and the rabbit understood. The boy is very clever. It would never have occurred to me to make a cooler with sand, salt, and water, the heroine said as she watched the green-haired boy in the distance. And I must admit, he's handsome, the heroine said as she watched the shirtless green-haired boy walk away and remembered the feeling of the green-haired boy holding her hand. Hey, cradle robber, let's have breakfast, Midnight said as she called the blonde, who got angry at how she called her. I'm not a cradle robber. The blonde shouted angrily. Yes, whatever you say, come on, the boy is talking to us, said the rabbit while pointing to the green-haired boy who was telling them to come with him to have breakfast. A peaceful breakfast was what everyone expected, but their tranquility was broken when they saw how the Triceratops and the Carnotaurus seemed somewhat fearful of something hiding in the bushes. The green-haired one stood up from where he was sitting and took his spear, bow, axe, pickaxe, and knife, put everything in its place, and slowly approached while aiming the bow at the area where the two dinosaurs were roaring. Back off, the green-haired boy called to the dinosaurs that had positioned themselves behind him. Everyone watched the green-haired creature in the distance with concern, because it's not every day something frightens two large, heavy reptiles. A deathly silence fell, broken only seconds later when an albino raptor leapt from the bushes. Everyone was going to sigh with relief, if it weren't for the raptor roaring, making its deep roar known, scaring the reptiles even more and causing the green-haired raptor to be frightened in the same way. The green-haired creature analyzed the biped in front of him. Except for its color, it was very similar to his raptor. He managed to see how the raptor was watching them, but it wasn't attacking. For a few seconds, its pupil was a perfect circle, then it split, and the raptor became very aggressive. It began to smash itself against nearby rocks and trees. Its entire body was damaged, especially its head. For a few seconds, it stopped and fixed its gaze on the green-haired creature, which remained on guard. Noticing the reptile's clear intentions, the green-haired creature attacked first. As it got closer, it noticed a slight reddish humiliation sprouting from its back, a red similar to blood. Upon noticing this humiliation, he jumped away, an action that baffled the spectators. What's happening? Kendo asked, watching the battle that was about to unfold. Why did he back down? Was he scared? Asked Mirko, who still didn't accept the boy as leader. I doubt it. He faced worse things, Iida said, and everyone remembered various fights with the green-haired man. He even defeated a T-Rex, a simple raptor is no problem, Jiro said excitedly, remembering the moment the boy saved her. So, what happened? Momo asked, keeping her eyes on the fight. They don't realize. That raptor is different, Yukio said, noticing things despite her short time on the island. My quirk is dragon. It grants me its abilities and instincts. My instincts are telling me to get away from that raptor right now, which didn't happen with the Spinosaurus, the dragon explained, and everyone became concerned about the green-haired girl. So, that raptor can beat you? Komori asked the heroine, who shook her head. If I could transform, I doubt it, but as I am now, it destroys me. Even if I could transform partially, I think it would win, the heroine said, and all eyes turned to the green hair. The battle, to everyone's surprise, had apparently started a few minutes ago, a very bloody fight. The Carnotaurus had a large scar in the middle of its chest, almost exposing its lung. The Triceratops had lost an eye, the other raptor that joined the fight had lost one of its front legs and the tip of its tail. These parts were lying on the ground. A fairly large piece of meat, an eye, a short leg, and a piece of tail. There was also an arm. Wait, an arm. Everyone saw the green-haired boy who had lost his left arm. They all watched with great concern, as he was clearly at a disadvantage. They all snapped out of their thoughts at the sound of a loud roar. It was the raptor's roar. The green-haired boy sighed heavily. "Come here, you fucking lizard." The ferocious smile of the green-haired one sent more than one shiver down the spines of the spectators. "Guys, pick up my arm." The green-haired one spoke, and everyone looked with disgust at the green-haired one's arm lying on the ground. The green-haired one grabbed his spear with his remaining arm and his knife in his mouth. "Some of us may not survive," the green-haired one said, looking at his reptile companions. The reptiles seemed to understand what he said and stepped forward. "That's more like it." They launched another attack. The albino raptor, despite being in terrible condition, remained standing, seemingly ignoring the pain. A bloody battle resumed. The green-haired one used his full power in one arm. The spear had pierced the raptor more than once, but it did not yield. The Triceratops' horns rammed into the raptor, who only responded by biting and scraping the Triceratops' face. The Triceratops didn't stop and slammed it against a rock, piercing its ribs but not yet finished. The Carnotaurus, using its great strength and size, grabbed the raptor's entire body in its mouth and shook it before dropping it against a rock. Finally, the raptor jumped on top of the albino while biting his face. The albino managed to slash at one of the raptor's eyes, and the raptor moved away while gradually losing its vision. He quickly got up and ran towards the green-haired boy. The somewhat nervous boy approached him, seeing everything in slow motion as he got closer. Then he felt it. A liquid leaked from his eyes and without warning fell to the ground. He had overexerted himself. They all watched in fear as their friend, leader, companion, but above all, beloved, was about to die. Everyone paralyzed with fear, everyone except one person. A head of black hair ran until it stood before her beloved. The girl knew she loved the green-haired boy so much that she would give her life for him. And so he did. A diagonal swipe struck the girl, who turned to look at the boy. The boy's eyes were wide open, tears streaming from his emerald eyes. The girl's dark eyes also welled up with tears, and she smiled at him. I love you, Izuku," the girl smiled as she fell to the ground with a thud. "And no, why not you?" the boy said, gathering all his strength to run towards the girl as the boy's dinosaurs brutally finished off the dinosaur. I promised to protect you," the boy stammered as he looked at the girl's body, which barely showed any vital signs. "Thank you," the girl said to the green-haired boy as she closed her dark eyes and he hugged her as best he could. "And no, thank you, Momo." The boy hugged the raven-haired girl's corpse with tears in his eyes. "Momo is dead," Jiro whispered as tears streamed from her eyes. She couldn't bear it and burst into tears, collapsing to the ground and hugging her knees. "Momo, Yaoyorozu," Kendo whispered, looking at her friend from another class. As was inevitable, tears welled up in her eyes. Little by little everyone began to mourn the girl's loss. The heroines watched everything helplessly, doing nothing again. A great silence filled the place. They turned to see the green-haired man approaching with the girl's corpse pressed against his chest. He carefully placed it on the ground, a difficult task given his single arm. Upon seeing the corpse, Jiro approached it and stroked its cheek. "You promised me that we'd get out alive, and that you'd be with Izuku," the girl said, sobbing harder. The green-haired boy stared at the corpse in front of him, his expression serious. His hair covered his eyes, which were dark green and lifeless. "Izuku, why didn't you do anything?" The purple-haired girl's complaint shocked many, and the green-haired girl was taken aback. "Jiro, it's not her fault," Uraraka exclaimed to the rocker. "Yes, it is," interrupted the rocker, blinded by rage. "You could have moved and stopped her from attacking her. He was missing an arm. And he was exhausted. You saw how bloody the fight was," Toru said angrily because the girl was complaining about the green-haired boy. "Toru, silence," the green-haired girl ordered, and the girl remained silent, still angry. "Jiro, I know how you feel." "No, you don't know," You didn't see your lifelong friend die. Only your stupid dinosaur died. The girl spoke, completely enraged, leaving a great silence in the place. Izuku. Don't say any more. The girl realized what she had said and noticed the boy's reaction. Tears welled up in his eyes again, for that memory still hurt. Jiro, you're stupid. Toru insulted the rocker girl as she followed behind the green-haired girl. Izuku, wait. A few meters away, Izuku sat gazing at the horizon, ignoring the absence of his arm. What am I doing wrong? The boy asked, and the girl couldn't help but shed tears at his distress. I give them food, I give them shelter, I protect them. Why do they blame me? The boy's voice was broken by tears, and what if? Is it really my fault? Izuku. The girl approached the young man until they were face to face. You're a wonderful person, none of this is your fault. But, first Mina, then Tokiyami. Now Momo. The boy said, still sobbing, if they're dying, it's for a reason. I don't want the others to die. I don't want you to die. Maybe I really am not enough to protect them. Maybe I'm too weak. Don't say that, you're the strongest person I know. Anyone else would have left us to our fate, but you fed and protected us. Momo died today, yes, but not because of you. She loved you just like I did and didn't want to see you die, the girl said, making the boy open his eyes again. Tears welled up once more. He hugged her as tightly as he could, sobbing against her chest. So many pent-up emotions had come out in just one day. The rest of the day was awkward. The girl's absence was palpable, as her memory was still very much alive. All meals and activities took place in a heavy, uncomfortable silence. The purple-haired girl tried to apologize more than once, but the green-haired boy always brushed her off. This continued until nightfall, when he once again avoided the purple-haired girl and went to sleep with his dinosaurs, who, despite their injuries, were not in danger of dying. Izuku was in a dense forest when, suddenly, the raptor that had killed Momo appeared before him. His eyes filled with fury at the sight of the reptile, but just as he was about to attack, the creature turned and fled into the thicket. Without thinking, Izuku pursued it, spear in hand. Several times he nearly caught it, but the raptor kept escaping, drawing him farther and farther away. Finally, the forest ended abruptly, and a vast meadow opened up before him. But the ground wasn't green, it was red. Blood red. Izuku turned his head in every direction, his heart pounding in his chest. There they were, every single one of his fallen comrades. Their corpses reflected the horrific ways in which they had died. Mina. The sight of her mangled body lingered before him, a macabre, endless repetition. The Giganotosaurus had seized her with its claws, tearing the flesh from her thighs as it dragged her along, Mina's entrails exposed and splattered across the ground. Izuku could hear the rumble of her skull hitting the rocks as the beast ripped her apart, Mina's legs twisting impossibly, her bones crunching, her screams of agony echoing in his mind. The beast fed on her flesh, chewing and grinding, and though she tried to scream, her lungs filled with blood. Tokiyami. His body lay motionless on the ground, as if the weight of the island had crushed what remained of him. It wasn't a creature that killed him, but the relentless erosion of survival. Starvation had left him with enough strength for nothing more than breathing, and dehydration had cracked his throat, leaving him with an unbearable thirst he could never quench. Each breath grew heavier and heavier, the air burning his lungs, and his skin, taut and wrinkled, clung to his bones. But the worst part was what was happening inside his mind. As fatigue and madness took hold, he began to see things. Visions that haunted him in his delirium. Familiar figures moved around him, shadows of friends who were no longer there, speaking in distorted voices that demanded explanations. Why did you let us die? Why couldn't you do more? Their screams filled her head, and every time she saw them, her anguish grew, tearing her mind apart even more. Tokiyami tried to shut out the voices, but fatigue and fear dragged him further toward madness. With bloodshot eyes, he saw the faces of his fallen comrades, their expressions frozen in agony, unable to escape the endless replay of their deaths. Guilt consumed him like a plague. The island had robbed him of his will to live. In a final effort, he raised his hand, as if trying to grasp something vanishing into the mist. But his body could no longer respond. In that instant, Tokiyami's breathing stopped, stillness enveloped him, and the hallucinations faded along with his life, leaving him in profound silence. Shota, Kamikiri, and Bondo. The giant insects attacking them left nothing undevoured. The sound of their bodies being ripped apart from the inside was nauseating. Izuku could see the insects, massive mandibles sinking into their torsos, crushing their bones as they devoured them, their flesh brutally torn to shreds, entrails splattering everywhere. Shota's screams were horrific, his eyes bulging with terror as the creatures burrowed inside him, once fighting with all his might, until his limbs were completely ripped off, leaving only an empty shell. A little further on, Tetsu. His body was twisted grotesquely, like a broken figure. The sound of his spine snapping echoed in Izuku's ears. He was completely immobilized, but despair was still visible in his eyes, as if he had tried to fight against death itself, unable to do anything but watch his own end. The bones of his torso and neck snapped like dry twigs under the weight of an animal that had crushed him, and the worst part was the prolonged agony, the slow bleeding of his body. Izuku felt a chill. He had become separated from the group. How had he ended up like this? And finally, Momo Yaoyorozu. The sight of her body wasn't just painful, it was a spectacle of horror. The albino raptor had ripped her skin to shreds, exposing her muscles as her flesh was torn away piece by piece. Her screams were incomprehensible, drowned out by the crunching of bones as the beast dismembered her. Her face contorted in a mixture of disbelief and pain, her eyes wide as the raptor ripped the flesh from her thighs and arms. Momo's entrails splattered across the ground, the warmth of her blood still visible in the air as the creature continued its merciless devouring. The voices of his fallen comrades began to echo in his head, at first soft, like distant whispers, but soon they became unbearable, thundering in his ears, reverberating in every corner of his mind. The echoes of their cries, heavy with despair, began to invade him, and the words became daggers piercing his soul. "It's your fault. You promised you would protect us. You could have done more. You let us die." Izuku pressed his temples together with both hands, his nails digging into the skin of his scalp as if trying to tear those voices from his mind. His breathing quickened, each inhale feeling like a knife slicing deep into his chest. His body trembled uncontrollably, his muscles tense, as if each word of reproach were a weight crushing his very being. The pain intensified, a storm of anguish that left him breathless. "You let us die." The voices of his fallen friends filled his mind, becoming a relentless chorus that suffocated him. Izuku fell to his knees, the pain in his chest unbearable, as if his heart were about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Each beat was a reminder of his powerlessness, of his failure. He couldn't escape the images of their faces, the memories of their deaths, how he had watched them fall, one by one, and how he hadn't been able to do anything to stop it. "You could have done more." The screams echoed within him, a roar he couldn't silence. His body bent under the weight of guilt, his shoulders jerking with sobs that tore at his throat. Why couldn't I save them? He thought, and that question devoured him, gnawed at his soul with an unbearable fury. Tears fell uncontrollably, like rivers of despair that could not cleanse him of his torment. "No. It's not my fault," he murmured again and again, but his words broke, growing weaker with each repetition. The lie was the only answer he could cling to, but even that lie crumbled under the crushing weight of reality. Each sigh was like a stifled cry of helplessness, and his mind, unable to find solace, dragged him further into the darkness. Anguish enveloped him, every fiber of his being crumbled. Izuku hugged his own body, trembling with pain, as if by squeezing himself he could stop the voices that tormented him. I couldn't stand it anymore. The emptiness swallowed him whole, and though his mind screamed for respite, the pain never ceased. It was an endless torment, a cycle of suffering with no way out. After what felt like an eternity, Izuku looked up, every muscle in his body tense and exhausted, as if the mere act of looking were a colossal effort. Before him, a familiar figure materialized in the mist, blurred at first, but then growing clearer. It was a girl with raven hair, her face softened by a sweet smile that seemed to illuminate the emptiness around him. His heart leapt, and for a brief moment, a glimmer of hope flickered in his chest. He felt that, finally, something good was happening, as if he could reach out that hand, a comfort in the midst of pain. But just as he was about to take it, something violent interrupted the moment. A ferocious blow knocked the girl's hand away with such force that his vision dissolved in a blink. Izuku turned his head, panic gripping him as he saw the figure watching him, sick. His eyes, once filled with camaraderie and trust, were now filled with pure, hurtful hatred. His gaze pierced him like knives, brimming with contempt. "You." Jiro's face distorted in the darkness, her expression a reflection of the rage and pain that Izuku had caused. "You let her die, Izuku. You couldn't save her." The pain that invaded Izuku's chest was so overwhelming that his breathing stopped for a moment. "No." Her mind was screaming, but the words wouldn't come out of her mouth. "It wasn't my fault." The emptiness in his chest expanded like a deep wound, the suffering so tangible he could almost taste it. Jiro's disappointment, her contempt, her accusations pierced his heart like daggers, each word pulling him further into the abyss. Guilt was consuming him, and the image of Jiro, his friend, his partner, looking at him as if he were responsible for everything, made him crumble. The pain became unbearable. He could bear it no longer. His body collapsed, falling to his knees, as if the weight of his mistakes, the weight of the lost lives, was so crushing that he could no longer stand. "I did everything wrong," he whispered, but not even he believed his own words. His soul was broken, torn apart by visions of his fallen comrades, the shadow of his own failure hanging over him. Suddenly, a noise jolted him from his torment. He opened his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. Darkness enveloped him, and for a moment, he didn't know where he was. He looked around. The shadows seemed to dance in the gloom, mocking his suffering. Izuku's trembling hands reached out, searching for something in the darkness. He felt something rough and gritty beneath his fingers, something he couldn't identify. He opened his eyes slightly, struggling to adjust to the early morning darkness, a shiver running down his spine as he realized the proximity of something large and familiar. His fingers traced a scaly surface, smooth yet firm, covered with a thick, resilient layer of skin. An echo of his childhood pierced him, a memory buried beneath the weight of all he had lived through. "It just can't be," he murmured, his voice cracking, unable to believe what he was touching. Slowly, his eyes adjusted, and he saw the outline of an immense creature, its body undulating through the darkness. A dinosaur. His chest tightened with a mixture of fear and awe. It was the same dinosaur he had tamed as a baby, the one that had been by his side when he could still feel some hope, some semblance of normalcy. The creature observed him with calm eyes, filled with an inexplicable calm, but something inside Izuku could only feel a new blow of pain. "Why now?" he thought, confusion burning in his mind. The creature, though familiar, was no longer the answer he had hoped to find. The fact that it was there, beside him, only reminded him that, despite the connection they shared, it couldn't save him from the guilt that was drowning him. How could he find solace in something that belonged to a past that no longer existed? Izuku's hand trembled as he touched the dinosaur's skin, as if by touching it he could return something he had lost forever. But instead of relief, all that arose was an unbearable pressure in his chest. The weight of the island, the deaths of his comrades, Jiro's fury, all of it struck him with even greater force. Every breath he took felt as if life itself were slipping away. The dinosaur's presence enveloped him, but all he could think about was how that connection no longer meant the same thing. The bond that had once given him strength now only accentuated his weakness. "Why are you still here if you can't help me?" she whispered, her eyes filled with tears that couldn't fall. The dinosaur, oblivious to his torment, remained calm, as if it didn't understand the pain that consumed him. And perhaps it never would. Izuku knew this, but he couldn't help but wish it could. He couldn't help but yearn, even for a moment, that this connection would be enough to erase everything he had lost. Days passed since Izuku's mental breakdown. During that time, both his friends and Jiro noticed that he was acting strangely. He was very irritable and easily angered. One day, he suddenly disappeared for a few days, leaving them only a few kilos of meat. A few days later, he reappeared at the camp, but this time, without warning, he formed a small group. Izuku, Jiro, Toru, Tsuyu, Uraraka, Iida, Todoroki, and the three newly arrived heroines. Then the group left their camp without complaint, as it was clear that Izuku was not in the mood. On the way, he commented that it was a trip to find a new settlement and gather a few resources. The group has been exploring the island for several hours, searching for resources and a safer refuge after the recent dinosaur attacks. During their search, Jiro stumbles upon something strange, a structure buried in the undergrowth. Izuku cautiously approaches, parting the vegetation with his metal spear, until he discovers a rusty steel door, barely visible among the roots and accumulated mud. With effort, Izuku uses one of his metal knuckle dusters to pry open the door with a deafening screech. The air inside is heavy and damp. Toru takes a step back, feeling a chill. "What is this place?" he murmurs. The interior is a labyrinth of dark, dusty corridors, littered with papers and time-worn furniture. They walk in silence, alert to any danger. Upon reaching a larger room, they encounter something unsettling. Shelves filled with documents, bearing names that seem all too familiar. Izuku steps forward and picks up one of the files, reading aloud. Midoriya Izuku. Test Subject 07. Survival Prognosis. 1 year. Current status. Still alive. A lump forms in his throat. Uraraka covers her mouth with both hands, horrified. "This can't be true. We were kidnapped, yes, but were we really part of an experiment all this time?" Iida quickly reviews other documents. "Here's information on all of us. Jiro, Toru, Todoroki, Tsuyu, even Mirko, Yukio, and Midnight." Mirko, her fists clenched, kicks a chair against the wall. "So these bastards brought us here on purpose. It wasn't a mistake. They wanted to see how long it would take us to die." Yukio watches her sadly, but says nothing. Midnight, on the other hand, picks up a document and flips through it with a frown. There are even records of other subjects, and none of them made it out alive. Izuku tries to maintain his composure, but his hands tremble. His thoughts become jumbled as he recalls each friend he lost, each wound, each sleepless night. It wasn't by chance. There was never any hope of being rescued. It was always planned. A noise pulls him from his thoughts. A recording starts playing on an old player. Group 07 has shown unusual resilience. If they continue like this, we could accelerate the final phase. No matter how long they last. The island always exacts its toll. What if they don't die? So, we make sure they do it. Absolute silence. The group freezes. Jiro lets out a shaky sigh, but says nothing. Toru clutches his head in his hands, tears welling in his eyes. They used us. They used us like we were disposable trash. Iida clenches his teeth in barely contained rage, while Uraraka clings to his arm, seeking support. Then, one last transmission is activated. A distorted, mechanical, and cold voice echoes in the room. "Congratulations. You've come further than expected. It's a shame your time is running out so soon. Make sure you leave us valuable data before you fall." Izuku, who had remained silent, felt something break inside him. His breathing became erratic. The spear in his hand trembled. Then, with a roar of fury, he slammed his metal gauntlets into a table, shattering it in two. "We are not their toys." Rage consumed him, his eyes burning with a hatred he had never felt before. Every wound, every sacrifice, every dead friend, it was all part of a damned game. Toru watches him with concern, but says nothing. Jiro crosses his arms, closing his eyes bitterly. "So this is what we are to them." Mirko steps forward, a fierce smile on his face. "If they think we're going to die here, then we'll prove them wrong." Izuku takes a deep breath, trying to calm himself. His gaze is now cold, determined. "We're not just going to survive. We're going to make them regret not killing us sooner." The air grew even more tense after Izuku's words. Everyone present knew that his rage wasn't just a momentary outburst, but the result of accumulated pain and despair. Yet, the feeling that reality couldn't be changed weighed heavily upon them. Jiro was the first to break the silence. "We have to get out of here. We can't stay inside this macabre place." Izuku nodded, but it wasn't until his gaze fell on the documents scattered on the floor, their names written on them, that he felt the true urgency to act. "Yes, but this changes everything. We don't just have to survive. We have to find answers. Why did they do this to us? Who's behind all this?" Yukio stepped forward, his voice deep and firm. "We're going to need a plan, not just anger. We need to know what we're looking for before we leave. Every second we spend here, we're getting closer to something worse." Mirko nodded resolutely. "That's right. If we don't know how to get out of here, we could be walking towards our own grave." Izuku took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but the anger still simmered inside him. He knew they needed answers, but he also understood they had to move fast. Okay, we'll find what we need, but we'll do it carefully. Meanwhile, Jiro couldn't help but glare at Izuku with resentment. Despite the situation, the shadow of the past still loomed between them. She had suffered too much because of mistakes Izuku had made, and her hatred for him hadn't diminished. She couldn't forgive him, not yet. The pain of what had happened was still fresh in her heart, and although she knew they needed to work together now, her feelings toward him were complex and confusing. Just make sure you don't do anything stupid anymore, Jiro said coldly, without looking directly at him. The tension between them was palpable, but neither of them said anything more about it. Izuku, aware of the distance that had grown between them, felt uneasy but didn't respond. He knew Jiro wouldn't forgive him easily, especially after what had happened. However, there were bigger things at stake now, and even though their relationship was broken, he still needed to stay focused. The group continued their trek through the labyrinth of corridors, the echoes of their footsteps reverberating off the rusted walls. Time was running out. They knew any misstep could cost them their lives. Suddenly, Iida spotted something on one of the tables, a series of screens displaying different areas of the island. Some of the group members' faces appeared on the screens, and the feeling of being watched enveloped them like a disturbing shadow. "We can't stay here much longer," Uraraka said, her voice trembling but determined. "If they're monitoring all of this, we need to leave before something worse happens." Izuku approached the screens, studying each image closely. Their records were all there, like mere pieces on a chessboard. "We're being watched. We always have been," he murmured, his tone dark. Toru, with tears in her eyes, took a step back. "They're manipulating us. We're nothing more than experiments to them." Izuku couldn't help but glance at Jiro, searching for any reaction on her face. But she avoided his gaze, focusing on another screen, as if she didn't want to acknowledge him. The silence grew heavy, and the atmosphere became even more oppressive. No one wanted to accept what they had discovered, but they all knew there was no going back now. It was then that a mechanical sound filled the room, and a distorted voice resonated through the speakers, with a cold and calculating tone. "Group 07 has shown unusual resilience. If they continue like this, we could accelerate the final phase." The group tensed, realizing the experiment had reached a critical point. Jiro clenched her fists, her anger rising, but she said nothing. The situation had changed, but her hatred for Izuku remained unchanged. Izuku turned to face the group, his eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. "No matter what they do to us, we won't let them destroy us. Let's get out of here, and keep fighting to survive." As they prepared to leave, the tension between Izuku and Jiro remained a constant weight, but for now, they all knew that the only way forward was to move forward together. At least for the time being. The steel gate slammed shut behind the group with a sharp, metallic clang, as if the island itself wished to bury its secrets once more. The sun filtered weakly through the trees, signaling that sunset was near. No one spoke a word during the first few minutes of their walk. The air was heavy, as if each of them carried an invisible weight on their shoulders. Izuku walked in front, silent, his face hardened. His breathing was still heavy, but it was no longer from anger, it was from concentration. There was something different in his gaze. It was no longer just about surviving, now it was about revenge. "We can't go back to camp yet," he said suddenly, stopping without turning around. "Not until we're sure no one else is following us. Not humans, not cameras, not whatever is out there." Mirko frowned. "Do you have a plan, Midoriya?" He nodded. "Yes, but I need to be clear about that before I go back. This island is full of traps, and I'm not just talking about dinosaurs." The group briefly split up. While some kept watch over the surroundings, Todoroki and Tsuyu helped Iida examine a small metal panel he had ripped from the compound. It contained wires, a small transmitter, and a plate engraved with the number 07B. Tsuyu clicked her tongue. "It seems this was emitting a signal. They were probably tracking us." "No more," Todoroki said, mercilessly freezing the plate until it shattered into fragments. Jiro, on the other hand, had moved a few steps away from the group. She was sitting on a rock, silently gazing at the jungle that stretched out before her. Her face was tense, her headphones hanging loosely at her sides. Izuku saw her from afar, but didn't dare approach. Not now. It was Uraraka who broke the silence again, her voice low but determined. What if there's no way out? What if this place is designed to keep us from escaping? Then we destroyed it, Yukio replied without hesitation. Midnight, more serious than usual, leafed through one of the documents she had saved. There are names here, not just ours. There are other groups. Apparently, we're not the only ones. Some are dead, others disappeared. What if there are more facilities like that? Izuku turned to her. Then let's find them. All of them. One by one. A sharp buzz cut through the air. Everyone looked up. A drone, almost imperceptible among the branches, hovered above their heads, moving slowly through the trees like a mechanical vulture. Izuku didn't hesitate. He threw his spear with lethal precision, and the drone fell with a spark and a dull explosion of metal and smoke. As they approached, they saw the camera was still on. A message flickered on the screen. Group 07. They haven't escaped yet. The tension exploded. They're provoking us. Jiro shouted, on the verge of collapse. They're mocking us. Then let's stop giving them reasons to laugh, Izuku growled, gathering the drone's wreckage. From now on, we're going to act like what we are, a threat. Those words marked a collective decision. They would not return to the camp yet. It was too risky. Instead, they would look for a new vantage point, one that would allow them to remain hidden while they analyzed their discovery. They walked for hours, avoiding open paths, navigating swamps and hills with thick vegetation. The island was beginning to show another face, a darker one, almost sentient. In every tree there seemed to be an eye, in every rock a mouth whispering lies. And through it all, Izuku led, his gaze unwavering, hardened by pain and suppressed rage. Finally, Tsuyu spotted a waterfall at the bottom of a cliff. After a quick exploration, they discovered a hidden cave behind the cascade. It was narrow and damp, but deep enough to provide privacy from outsiders. They lit a small fire, covering it with stones to hide the smoke. For the first time in hours, someone dared to break the silence. What will happen if we don't find answers? Toru asked in a whisper, his eyes fixed on the flames. What if this can't be stopped? Izuku didn't respond immediately. He closed his eyes, recalling the recordings. The scientists' words. The contempt with which they spoke of them. Then we will make them pay with blood, he muttered. The silence returned, heavy and absolute. Jiro glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. For a moment, she thought this wasn't the Izuku she knew. That kind, smiling boy, was gone. But at the same time, this new Izuku was the only one capable of keeping them alive. She couldn't forgive him, not yet, but something told her she would need him. Everyone would need him, for what was coming. Iida, still clutching the broken transmitter panel, spoke gravely. We need more information. We can't fight an invisible enemy. If other facilities exist, if there are other recordings, we must locate them. We need a map of the island, a file, something. What if we find him? Uraraka asked. What do we do then? Then we change the rules, Mirko interjected. Let them start running for their lives. Izuku nodded slowly. Tomorrow we'll return to the complex. Not to the lab we saw, but to the secondary tunnels. There was a locked hatch, remember. Maybe there are servers, blueprints, more information. It doesn't matter if it's sealed. I'll open it. Yukio looked at him intently. You're changing, Midoriya. You're letting this consume you. He didn't answer, without hesitating. I'm just seeing things as they are. We're not students anymore. We're not heroes. We're survivors of an extermination camp. No one could refute it. No one wanted to. That night, the group slept poorly. Some because of fear, others because of anger. And some, like Jiro, because of something deeper. Guilt, resentment, and the constant reminder of what they had lost. She watched Izuku as he stood guard at the cave entrance. His silhouette against the waterfall made him look like a war statue. Cold, silent, unwavering. He remembered the days when he used to laugh, when he was always the first to offer words of encouragement. That boy was dead, and Jiro didn't know if he wanted him back. Just make sure you don't do anything stupid anymore, she said quietly from her corner. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. Izuku didn't answer. He only tilted his head slightly. Perhaps as a gesture of understanding. Or perhaps of resignation. Dawn arrived tinged with red. The fog covered the forest like a shroud. And although the group was exhausted, there was a new resolve in their eyes. That day they would not run away again. That day, the real hunt would begin. Because they knew the final phase had already begun. The cave had become their temporary sanctuary. The waterfall that concealed it not only muffled the sound of their voices but also provided them with a strange comfort, as if nature were trying to protect them from the horror that humanity had inflicted upon them. Night had completely fallen, and the only light came from the fire that crackled softly in the center of the shelter. Outside, the distant growls of some nocturnal dinosaur reminded them that danger still lurked. No one spoke. The silence was heavy, but no one had the strength to break it. Even their breathing was measured, as if speaking aloud might attract the gaze of something watching them from the darkness. Izuku sat at the edge of the camp, away from the fire, sharpening his spear with methodical movements. Each scrape against the metal was a release of pent-up frustration. His face, dimly lit by the flame, displayed an icy determination. No one dared interrupt him. It was Iida who finally approached, walking slowly until he stood beside him. "Midoriya, we need a clearer plan. We're moving blindly." Izuku didn't look up. "I know. But first, I need to think. What we discovered changes everything. And that's precisely why we need structure." Iida lowered her voice so the others wouldn't hear. "The group is tense. They're starting to be afraid of you." Izuku stopped sharpening. For a second, a crack of vulnerability appeared on his face. "I'm afraid of myself too, Iida. But if I let myself break again, we all die." Iida watched him, and for a moment he remembered the old Midoriya. The bright-eyed boy, always optimistic, willing to sacrifice himself for everyone. That boy was dead. What remained was a version hardened by loss. A weapon pointed at his enemies. Meanwhile, inside the cave, Jiro watched the interaction from afar. She pressed her lips together. There was a tension in the air whenever she looked at Izuku. His presence stirred a torrent of emotions she couldn't quite process. Pain, anger, confusion, but also a spark of something more. Something she refused to acknowledge. Toru, sitting next to her, noticed her gaze. "Still can't talk to him." "I don't want to talk to him," Jiro replied in a low, cold voice. "Or don't you want to hear it?" Jiro didn't answer. He simply turned toward the rock wall, trying to close his eyes. But sleep eluded him. Yukio, in another corner, was organizing the recovered documents. Midnight helped her, flipping through page after page. "This is bigger than we thought," the heroine said dryly. "There are records of previous tests here, even of failed experiments with other quirks." "They're studying us like we're lab rats," Yukio muttered. "They're looking for survival patterns. They want to know what makes us last, to replicate it, or eliminate it." "What if that's the ultimate goal?" Todoroki asked, stepping closer. "Creating soldiers, or weapons, or quirk controllers." Yukio looked at him thoughtfully. "So, we're in the middle of a war that no one knows exists." Dawn was just beginning to break through the thick fog when the group decided to resume their journey. The cave behind the waterfall had given them a few hours of refuge, but the weight of their discovery still throbbed in their hearts. No one slept well. Thoughts raced through their minds like sharp blades. The experiments, the files, the constant surveillance, everything indicated that they were not alone. They never had been. Izuku was the first to stand, his eyes heavy with fatigue but resolute. The fire, now reduced to embers, reflected orange flashes in his pupils. He observed the group silently for a few seconds, as if making sure everyone was prepared for what was to come. "Let's go," he said simply, breaking the stillness. Without arguing, the others began to prepare. Suyu packed some supplies, while Iida checked for the umpteenth time the makeshift equipment they had salvaged from the compound. Todoroki extinguished the fire with a light breath of frost. Mirko sharpened her spear with a piece of rock, and Midnight made sure no one had left any trace of their presence. Even Jiro, though silent, prepared efficiently, her movements as calculated as her expression. The group ventured deeper into the jungle again, but this time they weren't just looking for resources. Now they were hunting for answers. Their first destination was a series of hills to the north, visible from a clearing where they had camped weeks before. Izuku remembered seeing a rusty antenna sticking out from the vegetation. Back then, he thought it was just a remnant of the ancient civilization that had once occupied the island. Now he knew it was much more. If there's another facility nearby, we'll find it there, he explained as they moved forward. We need to understand the scope of this experiment. Who's running it? From where? Why? And most importantly, Midnight added in a low voice, is there a way out? During the walk, Jiro kept to herself, walking a few steps behind everyone. Her gaze would often drift toward Izuku, but whenever he tried to approach, she would look away. Even so, she watched him silently. The change in him was undeniable. Sometimes she felt fear, other times, a strange hope, as if the fury burning within him might finally open a door to freedom for them. After several hours dodging branches, steep slopes, and dinosaur tracks, they reached the hilly area. The antenna was still there, rusted but standing tall like a spear driven into the ground. The surrounding undergrowth was particularly dense, as if something or someone had manipulated it to conceal what lay beneath. Izuku and Mirko began clearing the area, and soon discovered a trapdoor underground. It wasn't made of metal like the previous one, but of a black alloy, much more resistant. This hasn't been here as long as the other complex, Iida said. It's more modern, which means there may still be people inside, Todoroki added, lighting a small flame on his palm as a precaution. After a few minutes of struggling, Izuku managed to open the trapdoor, and a descending staircase was revealed before them. There were no lights, only darkness. Let's go, he ordered without hesitation, getting out first. One by one, the rest followed. The air was damp and smelled of old metal. Unlike the first complex, this one appeared to be in use. The walls weren't as corroded, and some areas still showed signs of residual power. Cables hung from the ceilings, and the subtle hum of a distant generator vibrated in the air. Tsuyu cautiously advanced, using her agility to scan the corridors. In a side room, she found a panel partially powered on. With Iida's help, they managed to reactivate part of the system. Several screens began to flicker, and files slowly started loading. The images that appeared left them frozen. Recordings. Some were recent. The group saw themselves walking through the jungle. Talking, fighting, even sleeping. They're watching us all the time, Toru murmured, horrified. This is more than surveillance, Midnight said, examining one of the monitors. They're studying our reactions, our relationships, even our emotions. Izuku approached a recording of himself crying in front of the albino raptor's corpse months earlier. The camera was positioned high in a tree, hidden among the leaves. A date and a note accompanied it. Subject 07. Critical emotional breakdown. Reaction. Subsequent aggressive self-defense. Analysis. Potential biological weapon. The silence was absolute. Did they want us to destroy ourselves from within? Uraraka asked softly. Did they want us to lose everyone and become monsters? Izuku lowered his head, his fists clenched. He knew that was exactly what they were trying to do. But they would not succeed. Copy everything you can, that he ordered. We'll take this information with us. Todoroki approached another screen displaying a map of the island. But this one wasn't like the others they'd found. This one showed areas marked with labels. Harvest area, passive observation zone, elimination field. And, most unsettlingly, main control zone. It's in the center of the island, Todoroki said, pointing to a circular structure. It's the largest thing on the map. Then that's what we have to destroy, Mirko replied with a ferocious grin. Cut off their heads. As they continued reviewing documents, Midnight found a classified file. The file's name was Project Genesis. Upon opening it, they discovered something even more disturbing. The island wasn't an experiment to study survival. It was a testing ground for developing new biological weapons, created from human quirks combined with dinosaur DNA. Jiro covered her mouth, horrified. They're fusing humans with dinosaurs, he whispered. Forced mutations. Monsters. Perhaps that's what they tried to do with the other groups, Yukio said, his voice harsh. That's why no one else survived. Izuku nodded. His gaze was a mixture of disgust and fury. We cannot allow this to continue. This is beyond our control. Just then, the generator's hum intensified. The lights began to flicker. Iida frowned. They found us. They activated a security protocol. "Time to go," Suyu shouted. The group ran through the corridors, carrying makeshift hard drives, documents, and photographs. Behind them, doors began to close. The system was self-destructing. They didn't want the information to escape. They managed to escape just before an internal explosion rocked the place. The trapdoor flew off, and dark smoke began to spread across the hills. The sky trembled for a moment, as if the island itself were roaring with rage. From a distance, they watched the column of smoke rising. "Now they know we're fighting," Izuku said. "And we're not going to stop." Jiro, his heart still racing, approached him for the first time since they began their journey. He looked at him seriously, with no trace of hatred in his eyes, but neither was there any forgiveness. "Don't forget why we started this. It's not just about revenge." Izuku nodded slowly. "I know. It's about everyone who died, and making sure no one else has to go through this." The group turned around and began walking south, map in hand. Their next destination was clear: the main control zone. The heart of the experiment. They were no longer victims. Now they were the threat. The sun had begun to set again, plunging the island into a twilight that seemed to mirror the group's mood. They had advanced throughout the day, their minds fixed on the heart of the experiment, the main control zone. However, as they drew closer, the weight of the revelations and the approaching end began to take their toll. Izuku led the way, head held high but his gaze distant, as if he were mentally calculating every step they would take in the coming hours. The map in his hand showed a direct route to the center, but the pain of everything he had left behind continued to seep into his every thought, like a shadow he couldn't escape. Walking beside him was Jiro, her face still a mask of indifference. Sometimes, when Izuku glanced over his shoulder, their eyes met briefly, but neither broke the awkward silence that surrounded them. The animosity remained, but something had changed. The anger had given way to a kind of unspoken understanding, though the wound between them had not yet healed. Not far from them, Todoroki walked silently alongside Mirko and Iida, their eyes fixed on the horizon. They knew that what they faced wasn't just a matter of survival, it was a fight for the truth, a truth that even they didn't know if they could bear. The island, the tests, the experiments, everything was beginning to resemble a labyrinth with no way out. "We're close," Todoroki murmured, glancing up at an area of the jungle where the vegetation thinned out. A group of hills loomed before them, the sound of machinery echoing in the air. Izuku nodded silently. Each step brought him closer to the center of it all, but the emotional burden he carried seemed heavier with every passing moment. The deaths of his friends, the suffering of those who remained, the guilt that never faded, all of it still remained a part of him, a burden that grew more unbearable as they moved forward. "We're near the main control zone," Iida said, his voice grave. "If the information we've received is correct, that's where they're conducting the most lethal experiments." "That's where it all began," Izuku replied, his voice trembling slightly. It wasn't fear that plagued him, but a much deeper feeling, as if everything he had experienced so far was merely the prelude to something far darker. Jiro stopped, and her eyes, usually so close to the emotions of others, were now fixed on Izuku. The suffering she saw in him could not be ignored, and although her heart was still filled with fury, something inside her told her that things were no longer so simple. "Izuku," he whispered, and for a second, his voice trembled. Frustration, pain, and confusion mingled in his words. "Do you really still believe this is just about surviving? Do you think defeating them will bring us peace?" Izuku looked at her, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Their breathing became the only palpable sound in the air. But it was Mirko who broke the tense silence. "Izuku, we don't have time to hesitate," he shouted, raising his spear with determination. "If we don't, we'll lose what little humanity we have left. This is the moment. The end is in sight." But Jiro wasn't satisfied with Mirko's words. His gaze remained fixed on Izuku, searching for something he wasn't sure he'd find anymore. Trust, perhaps, hope, the same hope he'd once seen in his eyes, when life was just a challenge they could overcome together. "We're not just here for revenge, are we?" Jiro asked, almost without hope for an answer. Izuku stared at her, speechless, but his eyes, that cold gaze he'd acquired over time, seemed to speak for him. He knew that, yes, at some point revenge had been a driving force. But he also knew there was something more. Something much bigger than him, than all of them. "Let's do it for those who are gone," Izuku finally said, his voice resonating with a tone that left no room for doubt. He said it with the certainty of someone who had already lost so much that he had nothing left to lose. Jiro didn't respond, but the brush of their gaze faded. Something, however small, had changed between them. Perhaps there was no forgiveness, perhaps the scar they had created together would never fully heal. But now there was a common goal, and the path was clear. With the main control zone in sight, the group moved faster. Trees and vegetation became increasingly sparse, giving way to a landscape that seemed almost artificial. What had been hidden in the jungle for so long was now within their grasp. What they would find there, no one knew for sure. But what they did know was that, in the end, they would no longer be the victims. The wind blew fiercely, carrying with it the salty scent of the ocean and the distant rumble of thunder. Izuku Midoriya stood, his spear dripping with sweat, his body marked by the scars of countless battles, but his gaze was fixed, determined, more so than ever before. Before him, the island's final boss, a gigantic, monstrous creature, loomed with a presence that seemed to reverberate through the very ground. The echoes of fallen dinosaurs, lost battles, and shattered hopes had merged into this instant. Izuku's group stood behind him, ready to fight, but they knew this would be the moment when their leader, their friend, would have to face his destiny. Jiro, Toru, Uraraka, Tsuyu, Iida, Todoroki, Mirko, Yukio, and Midnight watched, burdened by the weight of lost souls. No one spoke. There were no words that could fill the void. Izuku stepped forward, without hesitation, without fear. There was something different in his gaze. The boy who had once been kind and shy was long gone. The suffering on the island, the loss of his friends, the rage built up from years of torture, all of it had transformed him into a man who feared nothing. Only one mission remained in his heart: to make those who had brought them here pay, to make them pay for every life that had been taken. "It's now or never," Izuku murmured, barely audible, to himself. But before the monstrous creature could attack, a blinding burst of light illuminated the horizon. The battle had begun. The group members scattered, fighting with what little strength they had left, attacking and dodging. The final boss was immense, its claws as long as those of a dinosaur of epic proportions. Its roars reverberated across the island, making it tremble. And yet, without hesitation, Izuku advanced toward it. "This isn't over," he shouted, launching himself into the fray. The metal spear gleamed, his body moving with a speed only someone like him could achieve. But even with his flawless technique, the monster seemed indestructible. Every blow Izuku landed seemed to be absorbed by the monster, which showed no signs of weakness. Yet his comrades didn't stop. They couldn't. They knew that if they fell now, all would be lost. Izuku skillfully dodged a fatal blow, the wind of the impact grazing his face. He was exhausted, his body could no longer go on, but his will was unbreakable. "We're not going to let you die here," Jiro shouted from a distance, his eyes filled with rage. Izuku looked at her, his expression reflecting what he had experienced on the island. That gaze, hard yet nostalgic, spoke volumes. "I know," Izuku replied, panting. "But this time I'll do it for everyone." The fight intensified, but the final boss seemed to have the upper hand. The ground trembled with each step the creature took, and Izuku's attacks grew less and less effective. Memories began to cloud his mind. He remembered his first day on the island. The laughter of his friends, the promises made, all the hopes that, little by little, faded away. All the time he had spent searching for a way out, an answer. But he had never found them. Not in the way he had expected. Then, amidst the chaos, Izuku heard a voice in his head. It was his mother, Inko Midoriya, her warm face, her comforting embrace. "Izuku, I love you. You've always been my hero. Forgive me, Mom," Izuku murmured, feeling a tear slide down his face. "I couldn't go back." The image of Momo also appeared in her mind. The loss of her friend, her love. The way everything had crumbled when she fell. "I'm sorry, Momo," she said softly. "I failed you. I couldn't save you." But his memories didn't stop there. He remembered each of his friends, those who were no longer there, those who fought and fell. In his mind, he saw their faces, heard their voices. It was his memories that kept him standing, even though his body could no longer bear it. With a roar that echoed across the entire island, the final boss attacked with overwhelming force, disintegrating everything in its path. At that moment, Izuku raised his spear once more. He couldn't help it. His body was exhausted, his heart heavy, but something inside him compelled him to advance once more. He remembered his comrades, Jiro, Toru, Tsuyu, all of them, and he knew he couldn't give up. The spear sank into the monster's chest, and at that moment, a burst of light illuminated the island as if it were the end of everything. Izuku collapsed to the ground, his breath ragged, his body utterly exhausted. The island began to crumble around him, but his mind remained clear, as if he had attained a peace he had never known. "Thank you for everything," Izuku whispered, closing his eyes. His body no longer responded, but his soul was at peace. In the distance, the final boss's roar was muffled by the distance, and the lights began to fade. The rest of the group, seeing Izuku fall, rushed toward him in desperation, but they knew it was too late. He had given his life for them. At that moment, the earth shook again. Without warning, a squadron of helicopters appeared on the horizon, rapidly descending toward the island. The group members were quickly evacuated, taken to safety by the UA helicopters, as the island collapsed behind them. But no matter how fast they ran, they couldn't escape the void left by Izuku's absence. The wind howled as the rescue helicopters descended. The island, now in ruins, crumbled after the final battle. Izuku Midoriya was gone. His sacrifice had ensured his friend's survival, but it had left an irreparable void in their hearts. Each member of the group, as they were evacuated, felt like a shadow of their former selves, the weight of their loss making each step heavier than the last. Upon reaching land, the group was greeted by a crowd that initially stared at them in disbelief. The faces of the young heroes, etched with suffering, rage, and loss, reflected all they had endured. Jiro, her eyes red and her face pale, walked with slumped shoulders. Tsuyu, staring straight ahead, tried to maintain her composure, but her hands trembled. Uraraka stared into space, her body exhausted by the horrors she had witnessed. But it was Izuku's mother, Inko Midoriya, who broke the silence with a heart-wrenching cry, her voice filled with despair and anguish. When she saw her son in the distance, her heart pounded with the hope of seeing him emerge unharmed. But that hope vanished when she realized that the boy who had always filled her life with joy was not among those rescued. "Where's Izuku?" Inko shouted, running toward the group of evacuees. Her expression was one of fear, of terror, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The group remained silent, their eyes avoiding hers. No one knew what to say. It was Jiro who finally broke the silence. Her voice was low, broken, as if it were difficult for her to utter those words, but she knew she had to. "Izuku. No. He didn't make it out. He fought to the very end to save us." Inko stopped dead in her tracks, her face contorted in a mixture of pain and denial. She fell to her knees, her hands searching for the ground, as if trying to anchor herself to the earth to avoid falling. What are you saying? How is this possible? Why? No. It can't be." The words didn't come out clearly, her breathing becoming erratic. In that moment, all the memories of happy days, of her son running through the house, of shared laughter, crumbled like sandcastles before a destructive tide. Inko wept inconsolably, unable to understand why her son, her Izuku, had had to pay with his life. As the crowd watched in silence, Inko's grief was palpable. The mother's tears fell like an unstoppable rain. Every member of the group, in some way, felt the burden of Izuku's loss, but no one more so than Inko, the woman who had brought him into the world and raised him with such love. It was as if the air itself had grown thick, as if the weight of tragedy had settled upon them all. But Inko wasn't the only one suffering. In another part of the city, Momo's family, the Yaoyorozus, received news of the rescue. At first, they thought their daughter was safe, that it would be another story of triumphant heroes, but the cruel and devastating truth arrived like a fatal blow. Momo, too, had fallen, along with her friends, in the fight for survival. Momo's parents, like Inko, were speechless when they heard the news. Silence filled the room until, finally, Momo's mother let out a broken sigh. Her father, his gaze lost in the distance, struggled to find some kind of solace. But reality was unforgiving. Momo was gone. Their daughter, the bright and vibrant girl, had been taken from them in the fight for an uncertain future. The pain of Momo's parents merged with Inko's. No comfort seemed enough. No words could fill the void left by their children's deaths. The hopes of a reunion, of seeing their little ones return home, vanished as quickly as the rescue helicopters arrived. But there was something more. The entire Japanese nation, upon learning of Izuku's sacrifice and that of the group of heroes, was plunged into deep sorrow. The nation, which had admired these young people since their first days at UA, now mourned them. The news reports, covering the rescues, became a silent tribute to those who gave everything for the sake of others. The heroes who fought against the horrors of the island became martyrs in the eyes of the people. But for Izuku, there was no glory. Only the pain of parting remained. In the days following the rescue, a ceremony was held to honor the fallen. The entire country stood silently to remember those who were no longer with them. UA, the school that had educated them, organized a live broadcast to pay tribute to all those who lost their lives on the island, especially Izuku and Momo. The crowd was gathered, a sea of grief-stricken faces, with flags flying at half-mast. Izuku Midoriya's death had not only affected his family and friends, but an entire nation that considered him a symbol of hope. Izuku was remembered as the hero who gave his life to save others. The nation honored him, not only for his bravery on the battlefield, but for the purity of his heart, for his unwavering desire to protect others despite adversity. Inko, Izuku's mother, was the first to speak during the ceremony. With a trembling voice, she addressed her son, "Izuku, you were always my hero. I don't know how to go on without you, but I know that wherever you are, you will continue to be a light for us. I love you with all my heart, and I always will." Momo, for her part, was remembered as a bright young woman, a loyal friend, and a tireless fighter. Her parents, heartbroken, also spoke during the ceremony. Our daughter, Momo, was always a beacon of hope. Although she is no longer with us, her legacy will live on in all who knew her and all who fought alongside her. The entire country united in grief, but also in gratitude. The sacrifices of Izuku and his friends would not be forgotten. In their hearts, they knew they had fought for something greater than themselves, for a future that could still be built, even after so much loss. But as the wind gently swept over the crowd, something was etched into their minds. Izuku Midoriya had not died in vain. He, like everyone else, had fought for hope. And that hope would never be extinguished. Within a few months, the news went viral and exploded on the internet. Each of the articles shared something in common. The title: Class 1A in Prehistory. The end. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and make sure to like and please hype this video. Now we will see you in the next video.